For centuries, the human tribes of the Eastern Kingdoms thrived, though their existence was marked by constant conflict over land and power. Among them, the Arathi tribes stood on the northeastern borderlands, locked in a long and bloody history of skirmishes with the forest-dwelling trolls of the Amani Empire. The Arathi had retained the ancient art of weaponsmithing, a legacy passed down from their Vrykul ancestors. About 2,800 years before the Dark Portal, the troll incursions grew increasingly aggressive, posing a dire threat to the fractured human tribes. The Arathi, under the leadership of their warlord Thoradin, recognized that humanity's survival depended on unity. Faced with the possibility of annihilation, Thoradin declared himself king, vowing to unite the scattered tribes under one banner to stand against the rising troll menace. Thoradin's campaign was not just one of conquest, but also of diplomacy and strategy. Over 6 relentless years, he brought the tribes together through a mix of political marriages, promises of prosperity, and when needed, through force. After each victory, Thoradin offered his defeated foes peace and equality in a new vision of a united human nation. This pragmatic approach, rare for such a young and war-torn race, won the loyalty of former enemies, transforming once bitter rivals into allies. Thoradin's bold plan laid the foundation for a new era of human strength and cooperation, as they faced the looming threat of the Amani Empire together, not as scattered tribes, but as a unified force. Thoradin's rise to power was marked by both strength and cunning. To bring the Alterac tribe into his fold, he challenged their leader Igneus to a duel and emerged victorious, proving his dominance. For the fiercely spiritual tribes of Tirisfal Glades, he took a different approach, tapping into their religious beliefs by promising to honor and spread their traditions among the Arathi people. But Thoradin's most clever move came when he asked each tribal leader to offer up their weapon. His blacksmiths embedded shards from these weapons into his own greatsword, Stromkar. This symbolic act held deep meaning for the tribes, as they believed their ancestors' spirits resided within their weapons. Now, with the forebear's essence bound to Thoradin's sword, no warlord dared challenge him, for to strike against him would mean striking at their own ancestors. Under Thoradin's banner, once divided human tribes united as one. He declared this new nation Erethdor and established its capital in Strom, a city nestled in the region that would become known as the Arathi Highlands. Erethdor's strength grew, and it soon found a powerful ally in the High Elves of Quel'Thalas. Together, they faced the Amani trolls in the legendary Troll Wars, emerging victorious. In gratitude, the High Elves swore loyalty and eternal friendship to Erethdor and to Thoradin's bloodline, cementing an alliance that would shape the future of the Eastern Kingdoms. Erethdor stood strong for over 1,000 years, but like all great empires, it eventually fractured. Roughly 1,200 years before the Dark Portal, Strom's noble families, lured by the promise of fertile lands, sought to leave the rugged Arathi Highlands for the northern regions of Lordaeron. Thoradin's heirs, descendants of the once unifying Arathi lineage, fought to keep Strom alive, believing the ancient capital should not be forsaken. However, the nobles left regardless, and soon even the Arathi bloodline, led by a figure named Falder, departed Strom. They traveled south and founded a new kingdom, Stormwind, in the wilderness of Azeroth. As Erethdor dissolved, the last remnants of the once great empire faded into myth, with northern kingdoms recounting tales of the Arathi disappearing into the southern lands after the empire's fall. Yet the legacy of the Erethdor bloodline endured through Lord Anduin Lothar, a descendant of Thoradin. A legendary warrior like his ancestors, Lothar rose to lead the alliance of Lordaeron during the Second War. Before the conflict with the Orcish Horde, Lothar invoked the ancient oath sworn by the High Elves of Quel'Thalas to Thoradin's line, calling upon their loyalty once again. Lothar's heroic stand ended with his death at the siege of Blackrock Spire, marking the end of the Arathi bloodline in the Eastern Kingdoms. However, whispers persist of a surviving branch of Lothar's family in the distant Arathi Empire across the sea, keeping alive the legacy of Thoradin. Anduin Lothar was one of the last living descendants of the Arathi bloodline. Raised in the royal court of Stormwind, he shared a close bond with Prince Lane Wrynn and Medivh, forming a trio that would shape the future of Azeroth. In their youth, the three ventured into the untamed wilderness, facing dangers like the savage jungle trolls in Stranglethorn Vale. forging a brotherhood that would last into adulthood. Lothar's early years were marked by a deep dedication to the study of warfare and history. He joined Stormwind's military at a young age, where his natural leadership and combat prowess quickly earned him a place in the King's Honor Guard. His bravery and talent on the battlefield did not go unnoticed, and he was soon knighted, rising to the prestigious rank of armsman in the elite Brotherhood of the Horse, which was the official name of the Kingdom of Stormwind's knights before the First War. Lothar's fame spread beyond Stormwind, reaching the distant kingdoms of Lordaeron and even the magical city of Dalaran. His reputation as a warrior of unmatched valor and a leader of great wisdom set him apart, foreshadowing the legendary role he would later play in Azeroth's history. Years after the Null War, Stormwind settlers began expanding southward, encroaching on the land near the dangerous jungles of Stranglethorn Vale, home to the fierce Gurabashi tribe. Tensions quickly escalated and skirmishes broke out between Stormwind forces and the Gurabashi warriors. However, King Berethan Rin, now elderly, refused to order a full invasion into Stranglethorn. Instead, he focused on a defensive strategy, much to the frustration of his son, Prince Lane, who saw the need for more aggressive action. Although the king's defensive approach managed to hold back most Gurabashi raids, it couldn't prevent every attack. One raid was particularly brutal, resulting in the slow and barbaric slaughter of villagers in 3 Westfall towns. This horrific incident became the breaking point for Lane, Anduin Lothar, and their lifelong friend Medivh. Defying the king's orders, the three decided to take matters into their own hands and launched a dangerous mission south to bring war to the Gurabashi. Initially shielded by Medivh's powerful magic, the trio ventured deep into Stranglethorn Vale. But their defiance soon led them to a perilous battle with Jok'Nun, a fearsome Gurabashi warlord empowered by the bloodthirsty god Hakar the Soulflayer. The fight was brutal, pushing the three friends to the edge of their abilities. In the end, they emerged victorious, though they returned to Stormwind deeply shaken, not just by the battle, but by the frightening extent of Medivh's powers, which hinted at something far darker stirring within him. Though none of the Gurabashi trolls who witnessed Jok'Nun's death survived, it didn't take long for the tribe to figure out who was responsible. Ferocious and vowing revenge, they rallied under Jok'Nun's son, Xan'nan, and launched a devastating invasion, intent on razing Stormwind to the ground. Faced with the overwhelming force of the Gurabashi, King Berethan Rin ordered all of Stormwind's forces to retreat to the stronghold's gates, preparing for what he believed to be one final, decisive battle for the kingdom's survival. As the battle raged, casualties piled on both sides. Berethan, determined to end the conflict, led a bold counterattack aimed directly at Xan'nan. In a fierce clash, the aging king came heartbreakingly close to slaying the troll leader, but fate had other plans. Berethan fell on the battlefield before he could deliver the final blow. Overcome with guilt and desperation, Prince Lane turned to Medivh, begging him to unleash the terrifying power he had once used to defeat Jok'Nun. Though deeply afraid of what that power would do, Medivh reluctantly agreed. With a display of raw, untamed magic, Medivh annihilated the Gurabashi forces, including Xan'nan, avenging Berethan's death and securing victory for Stormwind. The kingdom was saved, but the price of Medivh's unleashed power left a lingering unease among those who witnessed it. In the aftermath of the battle, Anduin Lothar was elevated to one of the highest ranks in Stormwind's military, a recognition of his bravery and leadership in the war. Meanwhile, in the years that followed, Lothar quietly sent many apprentice spellcasters to Medivh, hoping to strengthen Stormwind's arcane forces. But Medivh, haunted by his own abilities, refused every one of them, retreating further into isolation. When reports of strange creatures lurking in the Black Morass began to surface, Stormwind was abuzz with speculation. Whispers spread through the streets suggesting the creatures might be vengeful spirits, trolls wielding new powers, or even an unknown race from across the Great Sea. Eager to uncover the truth, King Lane dispatched Anduin Lothar to investigate. Leading a small force of the Knights of Stormwind, Lothar ventured into the Black Morass, unknowingly stepping into history's first bloody clashes between humans and orcs. Lothar and his men won several hard-fought skirmishes, yet for every orc they struck down, more seemed to pour in from the swamps. The orcs were relentless, their numbers swelling with each encounter. Overwhelmed and outnumbered, Lothar was forced to pull his forces back before they could penetrate far enough into the morass to discover the source of these invaders, the Dark Portal. He returned to King Lane with grim news. These creatures were not a mere wandering band. They were being reinforced from somewhere, and Stormwind would soon face a full-scale invasion. Thus began preparations for what would come to be known as the First War. As the kingdom readied for battle, Lothar's first task was to recruit and bolster Stormwind's army. In the midst of these efforts, he and his soldiers encountered Medivh and his young apprentice Khadgar on a scouting mission near the Black Morass. Lothar urged his old friend Medivh to join Stormwind's defense. Aware of the Guardians' inner conflict, Medivh, however, feigned reluctance, pretending to fear the full extent of his magical abilities. In reality, he was stalling, allowing the Horde time to gather strength for the impending invasion. Lothar also confided in Khadgar, sharing his concerns about Medivh's troubled past and urging the young apprentice to watch over the Guardian as more than just a student, but as a protector. Little did Lothar know, the darkness stirring within Medivh was far greater than anyone had realized, and would soon plunge them all into a war that would reshape Azeroth forever. Warchief Blackhand, the ruthless Orcish leader, unleashed raiding parties deep into Stormwind's territories, intending to spread fear and chaos among the human population. Villages across Brightwood, Westfall, and the southern Red Ridge Mountains were devastated, homes burned, inhabitants slaughtered or forced to flee. By the time Stormwind's patrols arrived to defend these settlements, the Horde had already vanished, leaving only smoldering ruins in their wake. The Orcs moved with a precision and brutality that the humans had never before encountered. In response to the growing threat, King Lane named Anduin Lothar as the King's Champion, the highest military title in the kingdom, entrusting him with the task of eliminating the Orcish menace. Lothar, a seasoned strategist, quickly devised a plan to turn the Horde's mobility against them. He carefully studied the pattern of their attacks and set up ambushes along the Orcs' retreat routes. Using this strategy, Lothar sent a loyal knight, Gavinrad the Dire, to command large numbers of troops, strategically positioning them to outmaneuver the raiders. The plan worked brilliantly. In several cases, small units of human knights were able to intercept and destroy entire Orc raiding parties without suffering a single casualty. The Horde, once believing they could crush the humans with ease, soon realized that they were facing an adversary unlike any they had fought before. Both sides now recognized that they were locked in a deadly game of wits and strength, a battle that would decide the future of Stormwind and its people. 3 years after the Dark Portal had opened, the Orcish raids had wreaked havoc on Stormwind's countryside, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. Farms, villages, forges, and trade houses lay in ruins, crippling the kingdom's economy. Even more devastating was the loss of critical food supplies, many of which had been destroyed or fallen into Horde control, threatening Stormwind City with famine within a few months. Sensing weakness, Warchief Blackhand seized the opportunity and set his sights on the Red Ridge Mountains, planning to use them as a staging ground for an assault on Stormwind City itself. The Horde marched through the foothills of Red Ridge with little resistance, confident that the humans wouldn't dare attack until they reached Stormwind's gates. It was exactly the illusion Lothar wanted to create. As Blackhand led a raiding party into the mountains to seize Lakeshire, Lothar sprang his trap. In a daring maneuver, he and his knights charged down the slopes, launching a sudden and devastating ambush that caught the Orcs completely off guard. The Horde raiders, though ferocious, were quickly overwhelmed, and almost all were slain in the onslaught. Lothar himself came within an inch of killing Blackhand, but 2 warlocks from the Shadow Council accompanying the war chief unleashed a torrent of fellfire, forcing Lothar and his forces to retreat. Though Blackhand had narrowly escaped death, he was humiliated by the ambush. Ferocious as the warlocks for failing to foresee the trap, he executed both on the spot, blaming them for his near downfall. Despite this temporary victory for Lothar, the Horde regrouped, and weeks later they returned in force, capturing Lakeshire and the surrounding land. The war was far from over, and both sides knew that the final showdown was looming ever closer. After the fall of Brightwood, Westfall, and the Red Ridge Mountains, the Horde set its sights on Stormwind City. Thousands of Orc soldiers marched through Elwyn Forest, surrounding the city and cutting off all access except by sea. Warchief Blackhand tasked Kilrog Deadeye and Cho'Gall with leading their Bleeding Hollow and Twilight Hammer clans in a brutal siege on the capital. Throughout the night, siege engines relentlessly bombarded Stormwind's walls, weakening its defenses. As dawn broke, Kilrogg and Shogal launched their assault. Orc warriors stormed the battlements while warlocks rained fellfire upon the defenders, causing devastating losses. The situation grew dire. Stormwind teetered on the brink of collapse. Just as the city seemed doomed to fall, cries of alarm erupted from the rear lines of the Horde. Lothar, along with a majority of Stormwind's knights, had circled around the Horde by sea and now charged through Elwyn Forest, catching the Orc rearguard completely by surprise. The knights cut through the Horde's ranks with brutal efficiency. As the Bleeding Hollow and Twilight's Hammer clan struggled to regroup and fend off the knights, the gates of Stormwind suddenly burst open. The city's soldiers, emboldened by the turn of events, poured out in a counterattack, flanking the Orcs from the opposite side. Outmaneuvered and suffering heavy casualties, the Horde was forced into a chaotic retreat, fleeing back to the Red Ridge Mountains to rethink their strategy. This battle marked the greatest disaster the Horde had ever faced. The timely counterattack had been orchestrated with the help of information Lothar and King Lane received from Khadgar, who in turn had learned of the Horde plans from Garona. The intelligence proved critical in preparing Stormwind's defenses and turning the tide of the battle, securing a much-needed victory for the kingdom. During the war, a rogue band of ogres led by the fearsome ogre lord Turok stole the Tome of Divinity, a sacred book cherished by the clerics of Northshire. Determined to recover the tome, Anduin and Lothar led an expedition deep into the ogre's lair, the notorious Dead Mines in Westfall. However, the mission quickly turned into a disaster. Lothar and his men were overwhelmed and taken captive, left to face slow and torturous deaths. For nearly 20 agonizing months, Lothar and a handful of survivors languished in the ogre's caves, awaiting what seemed an inevitable fate. Salvation came when Azerothian troops, led by the Defender of the Crown and sent by both the Abbot of Northshire Abbey and King Lane, stormed the Dead Mines and freed Lothar and his men. With the Tome of Divinity reclaimed, Lothar returned to Stormwind, delivering the prized book back to Northshire Abbey. Though weakened by his captivity, he rejoined the war effort, once again leading Stormwind's forces against the Orcish Horde. In the third year of the war, during a private conversation, Lothar expressed his concerns about Medivh to Khadgar, recalling the mage's mysterious coma and unusual behavior. Troubled by these memories, Lothar arranged for a message to be sent to Karazhan, asking Medivh to return to Stormwind to help address the deaths of Hugarin and Huglar. Lothar's worst fears were confirmed when Khadgar later arrived with a grim revelation. Medivh had betrayed humanity by opening the Dark Portal and summoning the Orcs into Azeroth. Shocked by the news, Lothar shared this with King Lane, who refused to believe that Medivh would willingly betray Azeroth. The king argued that Medivh's questionable actions were likely part of a larger, brilliant plan to defeat the Horde. Confident in the mage's loyalty, Lane believed that Medivh, alongside the armies of Stormwind, would be enough to turn the tide of the war. Faced with a heartbreaking choice between his loyalty to the king and his instincts, Lothar trusted his gut. He gathered a force and, leaving the city's defenses in the hands of Gavinrad, led a daring assault on Karazhan to confront Medivh. Alongside Khadgar and the half-orc Garona, Lothar ventured into the depths of the tower to face the Mad Guardian. In a climactic battle, Khadgar delivered a fatal blow to Medivh by stabbing him in the heart, while Lothar dealt the final stroke, beheading the fallen Guardian with a single strike of his great sword. Thus, Medivh became the first Guardian in centuries to die in combat, his betrayal marking a turning point in the war, and solidifying Lothar's legacy as one of Azeroth's greatest heroes. The death of Medivh, though a significant blow to the dark forces threatening Azeroth, could not halt the relentless advance of the Orcish Horde. Returning from Karazhan with heavy hearts, Lothar and his warriors hoped to salvage what was left of their homeland, but what awaited them was a kingdom in ruins. Stormwind, once glorious, had been reduced to smoldering ashes. The Horde had ravaged the countryside, claiming the surrounding lands as their own, leaving devastation in their wake. To make matters worse, King Lane, their courageous leader, had been murdered, and the people of Stormwind, once proud and free, were forced into hiding, scattered and broken. In the face of this overwhelming tragedy, Lothar and his companions swore a solemn and grim oath to reclaim their homeland at any cost. Yet, even as they made this vow, Lothar understood the truth. Stormwind was lost. The war as they had known it was over. With the kingdom in ruins and the enemy too strong to repel, Lothar made a decision to focus on saving what remained of his people. He declared the war lost and turned his efforts towards survival. Gathering the remnants of Stormwind's shattered army and as many civilians as he could, Lothar led a desperate retreat across the Great Sea, steering them toward the distant shores of Lordaeron. There, he hoped to find refuge and allies, and perhaps the means one day to strike back against the Horde and reclaim the homeland they had lost. With King Lane dead and young Prince Varian still a child, the mantle of leadership fell to Anduin Lothar. As Knight Champion of Stormwind, Lothar took on the role of Varian's protector, vowing to protect the prince and ensure that one day Stormwind could be reclaimed. Together with Varian and Archmage Khadgar, Lothar journeyed to the court of King Tyrannus Medivh II of Lordaeron. Upon arriving in Lordaeron, Lothar recounted the tragic fall of Stormwind to any who would listen, his words carrying the weight of a kingdom's destruction. His passionate and eloquent pleas for unity stirred the hearts of many, leading to an emergency council of the human kingdoms. Thanks to the political skill of his longtime friend King Tyrannus, this council gave birth to the Alliance of Lordaeron. Lothar's tale traveled far, even reaching the ears of the High Elves, who had long remained aloof from human affairs. Remembering the ancient debt they owed the Arathi bloodline for saving Quel'Thalas during the Troll Wars, the elves sent a contingent of their forces to join the cause. The Wildhammer dwarves of Airy Peak, recently attacked by the Horde, also pledged their support to Lothar. As the Horde's conquest spread, the Bronzebeard dwarves and gnomes of Khaz Modan were driven from their homes, prompting them to rally behind the Alliance as well. With these powerful allies now united under the banner of the Alliance, Lothar had forged a force capable of challenging the might of the Orcish Horde, a coalition of humans, elves, dwarves, and gnomes determined to reclaim their homelands and drive the Horde from Azeroth. Due to his unmatched skill in warfare, his extensive expertise battling the orcs, and status as a neutral figure, free from the political rivalries of the Northern Kingdoms, Anduin Lothar, descendant of Thoradin, was appointed Supreme Commander of the Alliance forces. The Northern Kings, wary of placing their armies under the command of a rival nation, found in Lothar the perfect leader to unite them in the war against the Horde. During his time in Lordaeron, Lothar was approached by Alonzus Fowl, who was deeply saddened by the news of Northshire Abbey's fall. In response, Fowl introduced Lothar to a new order of holy warriors, the Paladins, and urged him to make them his commanders. Lothar readily accepted and soon appointed the promising young Turalyon, who reminded him of King Lane, as his second in command. Alongside Turalyon, he named his old friend Admiral Dalen Proudmoore, as well as Uther the Lightbringer and Khadgar as his lieutenants. By the time the orcs reached the shores of Lordaeron, Lothar was 56 years old. Throughout the Second War, he led the Alliance forces from battle to battle with valor and strategic brilliance, earning the title Lion of Azeroth for the sight of his flashing shield as he cut through orc ranks. After the Horde's mysterious retreat from Lordaeron and Admiral Proudmoore's decisive naval victories, Lothar pressed the offensive, leading the Alliance armies to liberate much of Khaz Modan, where he joined forces with Muradin and Bran Bronzebeard. His campaign continued into Azeroth, where he eventually breached the Black Morass itself. Sensing that the Horde was fracturing from within, Lothar saw his opportunity to strike a final blow. Gathering the remnants of his forces, he pushed Warchief Doomhammer south, driving the orcs back into the ruined heartland of Stormwind. There, the Alliance trapped the Horde within the volcanic fortress of Blackrock Spire. However, tragedy struck when Lothar and his troops were ambushed at the base of Blackrock Spire. The final confrontation between the two armies erupted in a devastating clash, a battle that would decide the fate of Azeroth. Amidst the chaos and bloodshed, Anduin Lothar, the Lion of Azeroth, became separated from his troops, surrounded by the fury of war. In the heart of the battlefield, he came face to face with Orgrim Doomhammer. The two legends engaged in a fierce and grueling duel, each strike resonating with the weight of their histories and the fate of their people. Lothar, though valiant, was worn down by the relentless onslaught. As the duel reached its climax, Doomhammer delivered a crushing blow, shattering Lothar's sword and leaving him vulnerable. In that fateful moment, Doomhammer struck again, his mighty hammer delivering a final brutal strike that shattered Lothar's skull. The fall of the Alliance's greatest hero sent shockwaves through the battlefield, the sound of his death echoing like a thunderclap. It was a moment that could have broken the Alliance, a loss that seemed insurmountable, but instead of succumbing to despair, Lothar's death ignited a fierce, burning resolve within the hearts of his comrades. Under the leadership of Turalyon, they rallied with renewed fury, turning the tide of the battle and delivering a crushing defeat to the Horde. Lothar's sacrifice became the spark that fueled their final victory, ensuring that his legacy would live on through the triumph of the Alliance. At the age of 57, Anduin Lothar never lived to see his beloved Stormwind rebuilt or freed from Orcish control. However, his legacy endures in stone, a towering monument depicting Lothar in his final battle. Defiant Charge still stands in the burning steps, forever pointing toward Blackrock's spire where he fell in battle. In a twist of fate, the materials used for the monument were hauled by orcs, forced into labor after their defeat in the Second War. Though Lothar is gone, his legacy continues to inspire the people of Stormwind. His name, immortalized in stone and memory, is carried by the kingdom's current king, a testament to the enduring spirit of the Lion of Azeroth. The Alliance expedition to Draenor, led by the battle-hardened veterans who fought alongside Anduin Lothar during the Second War, chose to honor his memory by calling themselves the Sons of Lothar. As Khadgar explains, they did so in honor of the greatest, most selfless man we ever knew. In Honorhold, a monument of remembrance was built, serving as a tribute to everything Lothar stood for and fought to protect. During his lifetime, Lothar authored what is regarded as the definitive guide to warfare, a book titled A Treatise on Strategy. This masterwork, written in his own hand, details the optimal deployment of forces and battle tactics, providing timeless wisdom for securing victory on the battlefield. His legacy is honored every year during Remembrance Day, a solemn occasion where his courage and sacrifice are remembered, as well as all those who have fallen in the line of duty fighting to protect the Alliance. And that's going to do it for this one. Hopefully you did enjoy. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you in the next one. The Kingdom of Stormwind stood as a beacon of prosperity and peace, its fertile lands transformed into a paradise under the stewardship of its people. Knights of Stormwind rode valiantly across the realm, dispensing justice and defending the innocent, while the clerics of Northshire Abbey brought healing and solace to the wounded and weary. Since the triumph of the Null War, the king's well-trained armies had upheld an enduring peace, fostering a golden era for the kingdom's citizens. Yet unbeknownst to the people of Stormwind, a dark force was plotting their undoing. Medivh, the powerful mage once revered as the guardian of Tirisfal, had succumbed to a sinister influence. His mind, twisted by the will of the dark titan Sargeras, sought the kingdom's destruction. Medivh forged an unholy alliance with Gul'dan, a warlock from another world, a realm torn by chaos and corruption. Together they worked in secret to create a gateway between their two worlds, a portal that would become known as the Dark Portal. From this rift emerged the Orcish Horde, a savage and bloodthirsty army unlike anything Azeroth had ever seen. The humans, caught off guard, were baffled by the reports of strange creatures prowling the Black Morass. Rumors spread like wildfire, speculating the nature of these beings: vengeful spirits, empowered trolls, or perhaps a race from distant lands across the Great Sea. But none could fathom the truth. The orcs were brutal and relentless. Their warriors wielded axes and spears with deadly precision, their war cries echoing through the forests. Others rode upon fearsome wolves as black as a starless night, their mounts just as ferocious as their riders. But it was their magic that struck the deepest fear into their enemies, malevolent spells fueled by the fires of the twisting nether. The orcs, tainted by the demonic blood of Manaroth, were driven by an insatiable lust for war, tearing apart anything and anyone that dared to stand in their way. As the Horde marched on Stormwind, their cunning strategies and devastating power clashed against the ingenuity and discipline of the human defenders. The ensuing battles were a test of intellect, courage, and brute strength, with neither side willing to yield. The stakes were nothing less than the fate of Azeroth itself, and the victor would claim dominion over the land's future. Seeking answers about the mysterious invaders, King Llane entrusted Sir Anduin Lothar with a crucial mission: to uncover the truth behind the strange new creatures that had been sighted. Lothar, a seasoned and trusted warrior, gathered a small contingent of knights and set out to investigate the foreboding Black Morass. It was here, amidst the swamp's dense foliage and treacherous terrain, that the Knights of Stormwind first clashed with the orcs, a savage enemy unlike any they had faced before. Though Lothar's men managed to secure a handful of victories in these early skirmishes, each fallen orc seemed to be replaced by 2 more. With each encounter, the invaders' numbers grew, and the battles became increasingly one-sided. Realizing the futility of pressing deeper into the heavily fortified Black Morass, Lothar made the difficult decision to retreat. His forces had failed to locate the source of the orcs' reinforcements, the ominous Dark Portal. But their sacrifices had not been in vain. Lothar returned to Stormwind with a grim report for King Llane. The invaders were not a mere raiding party, but an organized force, drawing reinforcements from an unknown location. Meanwhile, the orcs, under Warchief Blackhand's command, took note of the humans' awareness of their presence. The time for subtlety was over. Preparations and reconnaissance gave way to aggression, and the First War erupted in earnest. During this volatile time, Lothar crossed paths with the guardian Medivh and his young apprentice Khadgar on a patrol near the Black Morass. Ever the loyal friend, Lothar urged Medivh to lend his immense power to Stormwind's defense. He knew Medivh wrestled with the memory of the catastrophic magic he had unleashed upon the Gurbashi years ago, and he respected his reluctance to wield his full strength. Yet unbeknownst to Lothar, Medivh's hesitance was a facade. Corrupted by the malevolent influence of Sargeras, Medivh sought to stall the kingdom's efforts, allowing the invaders to grow stronger. During their brief time together, Lothar confided in Khadgar, recounting Medivh's troubled past and imploring the young mage to act not just as an apprentice, but as a caretaker. However, Medivh's behavior became increasingly erratic. He vanished for days without explanation and returned to Karazhan drained and irritable. His mental state frayed further with each passing day. The First War was no longer a distant threat, it had become a grim and present reality. Warchief Blackhand unleashed a terrifying strategy upon Stormwind, ordering his raiding parties to strike deep into the kingdom's heartland. The idyllic regions of Brightwood, now known as Duskwood, Westfall, and the southern Red Ridge Mountains became grim battlefields. Villages were burned to the ground, their inhabitants slaughtered or forced to flee in terror. By the time Stormwind's patrols arrived to defend their lands, the orcs had vanished into the shadows, leaving only destruction and despair in their wake. For the first time, the human kingdom faced an enemy as swift as it was brutal, an enemy unlike anything they had encountered before. Amid this chaos, King Llane turned to his most trusted general, Anduin Lothar, bestowing upon him the title of King's Champion, the highest military honor in Stormwind. Lothar, a brilliant tactician, sought to turn the orcs' own mobility against them. He studied the raiders' patterns, predicting their movements and setting ambushes along their retreat routes. Aiding him in this effort was the steadfast knight Gavinrad the Dire, whom Lothar entrusted with commanding large contingents of troops. In a series of decisive strikes, Lothar's forces dismantled several orc raiding parties. In some cases, small units of knights overwhelmed entire bands of orcs without suffering a single casualty. The Horde, initially so confident in its supremacy, soon came to see the humans as an adversary to be feared, a foe that matched their ferocity with cunning. Recognizing the scale of the threat, King Llane sent urgent messengers to the other human kingdoms, warning of the mysterious green-skinned invaders. Yet the pleas fell on deaf ears. Stormwind's isolationist policies of the past, once a point of pride, now cast a long shadow. Many neighboring nations saw the kingdom's self-reliance as arrogance and dismissed its cries for aid. Even Lordaeron, the most likely ally, offered only empty words of encouragement. Adding to the kingdom's woes, Deathwing, masquerading as a Stormwind noble named Davil Prestor, spread deliberate misinformation. He mocked King Llane's warnings, dismissing the orcs as nothing more than rebels within Stormwind's own borders. His deceitful influence ensured that no help would come from the north. As the Horde's war machine continued to ravage the land, Stormwind stood isolated, fighting not just for survival, but for the hope that their defiance might one day inspire others. Lothar and his knights, undeterred by the lack of allies, pressed on, determined to hold the line against an overwhelming foe. The battle for Stormwind had only begun, and the kingdom's resolve would be tested like never before. While the bulk of the Horde's forces clashed with the armies of Stormwind, Chieftain Kilrogg Deadeye and his Bleeding Hollow clan turned their attention southward. Drawn to the lush, untamed jungles of Stranglethorn Vale, which reminded them of the harsh beauty of their ancestral homeland, Kilrogg sought to carve out a dominion for his clan. However, Stranglethorn was far from uninhabited. The Gurubashi jungle trolls, ancient masters of the region, saw the orcs as an existential threat and united in a rare display of tribal solidarity to repel the invaders. What followed was a savage conflict marked by cunning and brutality. Though the Bleeding Hollow orcs often outnumbered the trolls in open skirmishes, they were at a grave disadvantage. The Gurubashi knew every shadowed trail and concealed ravine, exploiting the terrain to deadly effect. They lured the orcs deeper into the dense jungle, ceding ground only to unleash devastating ambushes that left scores of orcs dead. Despite their ferocity, the Bleeding Hollow suffered horrific losses, their strength whittled away by the trolls' relentless guerrilla tactics. When word of the mounting casualties reached War Chief Blackhand, his patience ran dry, deeming the Stranglethorn campaign a needless drain on his forces. He commanded Kilrogg to abandon the jungle and rejoin the war against the humans. The trolls, he decided, would be dealt with another day. Amid the carnage of the wider conflict, the clerics of the Brotherhood of Northshire emerged as unsung heroes. These devoted healers, armed with little more than their faith and the light of their magic, ventured fearlessly onto battlefields to aid the wounded. In the past, the Brotherhood's willingness to treat gnolls and trolls had occasionally granted them immunity from harm during conflicts. But with the orcs, there was no such reprieve. Once the Horde learned of the cleric's ability, they became prime targets. Orc warriors ruthlessly hunted them down, slaughtering the unarmed healers without mercy. Despite this, the clerics refused to abandon their sacred duty. Their bravery, often paid for in blood, became the stuff of legend among Stormwind's soldiers. Elsewhere, Warchief Blackhand faced a different kind of problem within his own ranks. The Twilight's Hammer clan, notorious for its defiance and erratic behavior, had become a thorn in his side. Many clan members disregarded orders, and some vanished entirely, drawn to unknown fates. Blackhand considered wiping out the insubordinate clan to set an example. However, an unlikely figure stepped forward to offer a solution: Cho'Gall, the mysterious and power-hungry ogre mage, acting as the Twilight Hammer's de facto leader. Cho'Gall proposed that he officially take control of the clan and bring it to heel. Blackhand reluctantly agreed, and to his surprise, the clan's discipline improved almost immediately. Under Cho'Gall's command, the Twilight's Hammer became an effective and obedient force. Yet their transformation was far from genuine. Cho'Gall had tapped into the clan's obsession with dark energies, channeling the whispers of the old gods that grew louder in Azeroth's shadowed corners. To his followers, Cho'Gall preached that the Hour of Twilight, the apocalyptic event foretold by their masters, was drawing near and that the Horde's victory was essential to its arrival. Until that time, he urged them to maintain their facade of loyalty to Blackhand, while secretly serving a darker agenda. Thus, as the fires of war spread across Azeroth, alliances formed, fractured, and conspired in the shadows. The stage was set not just for a clash of armies, but for the unfolding of plans far more insidious, where every player, knowingly or not, was a piece on the board of an ancient and malevolent game. 3 years after the Dark Portal's ominous opening, the Orcish Horde had left Stormwind's countryside in ruins. Farms were scorched, villages destroyed, and bustling trade houses reduced to ash. The kingdom's economy, once thriving, was in tatters. Worse still, the destruction of critical food supplies and the Horde's control over fertile lands threatened a grim future for Stormwind City itself, which faced the prospect of famine within months. Seizing on this advantage, Warchief Blackhand devised a bold strategy. The Horde would march north to claim the Red Ridge Mountains, using them as a staging ground for a direct assault on Stormwind. Confident in their superiority, the Horde advanced into the Red Ridge foothills with minimal resistance. To them, it seemed the humans were too broken to mount a defense before the Horde reached the city's gates. This belief played perfectly into the hands of Commander Anduin Lothar, who had carefully orchestrated their complacency. When an orc raiding party led by Blackhand himself ventured deeper into the Red Ridge Mountains, aiming to capture the town of Lakeshire, Lothar sprang his trap. Without warning, his knights thundered down the slopes, encircling the orcs in a breathtakingly swift and devastating ambush. The raiders, though fierce, were overwhelmed by the suddenness and precision of the attack. Nearly all of them fell beneath the blades of Lothar's forces. In the heat of battle, Lothar came perilously close to slaying Blackhand, but 2 Shadow Council warlocks accompanying the war chief intervened. Their fellfire turned the tide just enough to force Lothar to retreat. Though Blackhand survived, the encounter left him humiliated. His close brush with death gnawed at his pride, and his fury turned toward the Shadow Council warlocks who had saved him. Blaming them for failing to detect the ambush, he executed the 2 spellcasters on the spot, an act of rage that deeply angered Gul'dan. The loss of his subordinates, already limited in number, was a blow to the Shadow Council's influence, sowing seeds of tension within the Horde's leadership. Despite the Horde's initial setback, they returned weeks later with a larger force. This time, they crushed the human defenders and seized Lakeshire along with its surrounding lands. While Blackhand had claimed his prize, the cost of his hubris and the brewing discord within his ranks hinted at cracks forming beneath the Horde's seemingly unstoppable advance. For both sides, the battle for Azeroth was only growing more dangerous and unpredictable. With Brightwood, Westfall, and the Red Ridge Mountains already under Horde control, the Orcs turned their attention to the heart of the Kingdom of Stormwind, its capital, Stormwind City. Thousands of Horde soldiers marched relentlessly through Elwyn Forest, their numbers so vast they encircled the city, cutting off all access except by sea. Warchief Blackhand entrusted the assault to 2 of his fiercest lieutenants, Kilrog Deadeye of the Bleeding Hollow clan and Cho'Gall of the Twilight's Hammer. Together, they prepared to deliver what they believed would be the final blow. Throughout the night, the Horde siege engines hurled boulders and flaming projectiles at Stormwind's walls, shaking the city to its core. As dawn broke, Kilrog and Cho'Gall launched their assault. Orc warriors surged toward the battlements in waves, while warlocks unleashed torrents of fellfire, engulfing Stormwind's defenders in a blaze of chaos. The city's soldiers fought valiantly, but their losses were devastating. By midday, it seemed inevitable that Stormwind would fall. Then, a sudden clamor rose from the Horde's rear lines. Shouts of alarm and the clash of steel echoed through the forest as the unexpected unfolded. Commander Anduin Lothar and the majority of Stormwind's knights had arrived, attacking the Horde from behind. In a daring maneuver, Lothar had transported his forces by sea, landing them beyond the Horde's encirclement. Now, they charged through Elwyn Forest, catching the Orc rearguard completely unprepared. The battlefield erupted into chaos as Kilrog and Cho'Gall scrambled to reposition their forces. Stormwind's great gates swung open. Fresh waves of soldiers poured out, launching a devastating counterattack. With Lothar's knights hammering the rear and Stormwind's forces pressing the front, the Horde was utterly outflanked. Orcs fell by the hundreds, their ranks thrown into disarray. Facing mounting casualties and with no room to regroup, Kilrog and Cho'Gall had no choice but to order a retreat. What was intended to be the Horde's moment of triumph became their greatest disaster. Blackhand's fury was boundless. The war chief came perilously close to executing both Kilrog and Cho'Gall for their failure, but stayed his hand, knowing their clans might rebel if their leaders were slain. Instead, he ordered the Horde to withdraw to Red Ridge, where they would regroup and plot a new strategy. The loss was a humiliating blow, one that exposed vulnerabilities in the Horde's seemingly unstoppable campaign. Unbeknownst to the Horde, Stormwind's victory had not been mere chance. Lothar and King Lane had prepared for the attack after receiving critical intelligence. Khadgar, the young apprentice of Medivh, had uncovered the Horde's battle plans through Garona, the half-orc spy whose loyalties wavered between her people and her human allies. Armed with this knowledge, Lothar and his forces had turned what should have been the kingdom's darkest hour into a moment of defiance that would echo through history. The Horde's retreat gave Stormwind a fleeting reprieve, but the war was far from over. The question lingered: how long could the kingdom stand against such a relentless foe? For now, however, the soldiers of Stormwind stood victorious, their faith in Lothar and their king stronger than ever. After the Orcish Horde's initial assault on Stormwind Keep, they had learned enough about human tactics to refine their strategy. Warchief Blackhand, determined to strengthen the Horde's position, entrusted Orgrim Doomhammer with the task of establishing a forward outpost in the Swamp of Sorrows. The orders were clear: build at least 6 farms to sustain the troops, and build a barracks to protect the settlement, and then create a strategic foothold. The outpost, named Kairos, was to serve as the launching point for Orgrim's next campaign. From this swampy stronghold, Orgrim led his forces with unrelenting determination, crushing any opposition in their path. Their first major test came at Grand Hamlet. Under Blackhand's command, Orgrim constructed a makeshift outpost nearby to prepare for the assault. When the time came, his troops struck with ruthless efficiency. Grand Hamlet was burned to the ground, leaving no survivors. Its destruction a chilling testament to the Horde's growing dominance. Amidst this campaign of conquest, internal strife threatened the Horde's cohesion. A messenger brought grim news to Orgrim. Griselda, Blackhand's rebellious daughter, had fled with the outlaw Turok and his band of ogres. Furious at this betrayal, Blackhand ordered Orgrim to handle the matter personally, tracking the fugitives to the dungeons beneath the Deadmines. Orgrim led a small party of warriors into the dark, labyrinthine tunnels. Turok and his ogres fought savagely but were no match for Doomhammer's might. Griselda herself fell alongside them, a bitter end to a daughter's defiance. Upon returning from the Deadmines, Orgrim was met with yet another crisis. Scouts reported that a newly established outpost near Redridge Mountains was under siege by human forces. With no time to waste, Orgrim dispatched raiders to reinforce the position. Together, they drove back the attackers and secured the outpost. But Orgrim's work was far from over. Determined to root out the source of the human assault, he ordered his troops to scour the surrounding area. When they located the enemy encampment, Orgrim led a decisive attack, utterly annihilating it and ensuring the threat was permanently extinguished. Blackhand, ever ambitious, had grander plans for his forces. He ordered Orgrim to lead an army to Sunnyglade, a prosperous human town known for its mage tower. The war chief sought to plunder the tower's secrets and learn how the humans wielded magic. Sunnyglade's citizens, complacent in their prosperity, were unprepared for the Horde's ferocity. The town's defenders crumbled, their armies shattered before the might of Doomhammer's forces. True to Blackhand's instructions, the mage tower was spared from destruction, left standing as a potential treasure trove of arcane knowledge. Through ruthless conquest and unwavering discipline, Orgrim Doomhammer continued to carve a path of destruction across the lands of men. Yet with each victory the stakes grew higher, and the Horde's hunger for domination burned ever brighter. It was clear that their ambition stretched far beyond mere conquest. They sought to reshape the very world in their image. The Kingdom of Stormwind was desperate for a resolution to the relentless Orcish onslaught, so they sent emissaries to parley with the Horde. Yet, if any returned, it was only in gruesome fragments, a stark message that the Orcs had no interest in diplomacy. The mages of Stormwind turned to the esteemed Kirin Tor of Dalaran, seeking their aid against the growing threat. But the Kirin Tor dismissed the Orcs as little more than a minor local nuisance, unwilling to divert their resources to a seemingly distant problem. Amid this turmoil, King Lane sought to test the mettle of one of his most trusted champions, the Defender of the Crown. He appointed this figure as regent over a small parcel of land, a test not only of leadership but of foresight and strategy. Under the Defender's stewardship, the town was transformed into a thriving farming center, with 6 new farms established to bolster food supplies for Stormwind's beleaguered troops. Recognizing the danger of Orc patrols reported nearby, the Defender also oversaw the construction of a barracks to protect the settlement. The patrols, though few in number, were swiftly eradicated by the Defender's forces, securing the region for the time being. The peace did not last. Spies soon reported troubling news. The Orcs near Grand Hamlet were assembling a formidable army, their sights set on the town. Responding to the threat, King Lane dispatched the Defender of the Crown, accompanied by a small detachment of troops, to rally the townsfolk and prepare for the looming battle. Through sheer determination and inspiring leadership, the Defender managed to unite the people of Grand Hamlet into a capable militia. When the Horde's forces arrived, they were met with fierce resistance. Against all odds, the town was saved, and Blackhand's raiding parties were decisively routed. With Grand Hamlet secured, the focus shifted to ensuring lasting peace in the region. The Defender of the Crown identified the source of the Orcish threat, the outpost of Kairos, the staging ground for the Horde's final assault. Determined to eliminate this stronghold, the Defender established a small encampment near the outpost, gathering troops for a decisive strike. When the time came, they marched on Kairos with unwavering resolve. The battle was hard fought, but under the Defender's command, the Orcish outpost was utterly destroyed, leaving the Horde in disarray. Through bravery and strategic acumen, the Defender of the Crown had not only saved Grand Hamlet, but dealt a critical blow to the Horde's operations in the area. Yet even as the dust settled, there was an unspoken understanding that the war was far from over. It had been nearly 20 months since Sir Anduin Lothar, the king's champion, had led an ill-fated expedition into the Dead Mines in search of the legendary Tome of Divinity. No word had been heard from him or his companions since, and many believed him lost forever. That is, until the abbot of Northshire Abbey claimed to have seen a vision of Lothar, battered and desperate, pleading for aid. The vision stirred King Lane into action, determined to rescue his most trusted warrior. The king sent the Defender of the Crown along with a band of seasoned warriors and skilled healers into the depths of the Dead Mines to uncover Lothar's fate. The mines were a perilous labyrinth crawling with ogres, but the Defender of the Crown led the group with courage and precision, cutting a bloody swath through the monstrous ranks. Deep within the twisting tunnels, they found Sir Anduin Lothar and several members of his expedition, gravely wounded but alive. The healers worked swiftly, mending their injuries on the spot. Though weakened, Lothar was revived and soon returned to his duties as the king's champion, his survival a beacon of hope for the kingdom. Not long after, King Lane bolstered the Defender of the Crown's efforts to rid Elven Forest of the Horde's dark influence. A contingent of knights was assigned to his command, establishing a forward outpost at the forest's southeastern edge. From there, they launched an assault on a nearby orc encampment. The orcish warriors were crushed, and their defeat secured a vital foothold in the borderlands, strengthening Stormwind's defenses against further incursions. The Defender's next mission came swiftly. Northshire Abbey, a sacred haven, had come under siege not by orcs, but by misguided human warriors manipulated by enemy agents to rebel against the crown. The Defender, now reinforced by a platoon of knights, rallied his forces and arrived just in time to save the abbey's monks. Having driven off the attackers, the Defender pressed onward, tracking the rebellion to its source. In a decisive battle, the rebel stronghold was obliterated, restoring peace to the region. Meanwhile, grim news arrived from Sunnyglade. The town had fallen completely to the Horde, its surviving citizens enslaved and taken to a hidden compound deep in Orcish territory. Scouts confirmed that the prisoners were concentrated in one location, and a path for their escape could only be created by destroying a fortified enclosure. Without hesitation, the Defender of the Crown led a detachment of warriors into the heart of the enemy's camp. They crushed the Orcish forces and dismantled the enclosure, freeing the enslaved citizens of Sunnyglade. With the townsfolk liberated, efforts to rebuild Sunnyglade began in earnest, a testament to the resilience of Stormwind's people. Yet even as the kingdom celebrated its hard-won victories, the shadow of war loomed ever larger, and the Defender of the Crown knew that many battles still lay ahead. Each victory was a step forward, but the road to peace remained long and perilous. After the devastating fall of Sunnyglade, the orcs had mastered their newly acquired magic, harnessing its destructive power to fuel their campaign of conquest. Emboldened by this newfound strength, they prepared to wipe out the last vestiges of human resistance in the nearby lands. South of Orgrim Doomhammer's encampment lay two key outposts of the Kingdom of Stormwind, vital to the defense of the realm. Orcish scouts, after carefully surveying the area, devised a strategy. Hold back the human forces at their bridges, bottling them up while bolstering the Horde's ranks for an overwhelming assault. Once their forces were primed, the Horde struck with brutal precision. The outposts were obliterated, and every human defender was cut down, leaving the southern reaches in flames. The triumph in northern Elven Forest further fueled Orgrim's ambitions. It became clear to him that one decisive blow could shatter the Kingdom of Stormwind, paving the way for total domination. His spies uncovered critical intelligence, a training encampment near the kingdom's heart, where knights and soldiers honed their skills. The humans, unaware of the Horde's proximity, were unprepared for what came next. Orgrim's forces descended upon the encampment in a ferocious surprise attack, slaughtering everyone and reducing the site to smoldering ruins. With the destruction of this vital stronghold, the kingdom's military strength was significantly weakened, leaving them vulnerable to the Horde's relentless advance. The path to Stormwind Keep, King Lane's seat of power, now lay open. Only two settlements stood between the Orcish Horde and the capital, the twin cities of Goldshire and Moonbrook. These bustling hubs were lifelines for the kingdom, connecting the people to their king. Orgrim, understanding their strategic importance, ordered their complete and utter destruction. The Horde marched upon the twin cities, their war cries echoing through the land. The battles were fierce and bloody, but the Horde's might was unstoppable. Both cities were burned to the ground, their defenders slain, their citizens left to flee or perish. The destruction severed Stormwind's connections to its people, isolating the capital and leaving it as the kingdom's last bastion of hope. With Goldshire and Moonbrook reduced to ash, the final march on Stormwind City was at hand. The hour of reckoning had arrived for the Kingdom of Stormwind. as the Orcish Horde prepared to bring their campaign of terror to its ultimate conclusion. The shadow of the Horde loomed over the capital, and all that remained was for Orgrim to strike the final, fatal blow. Khadgar and Garona were the first to uncover the chilling truth about Medivh, that he had betrayed Azeroth by aiding the Orcish Horde in their invasion. Determined to understand the origins of the Dark Portal and the Horde's arrival, Garona urged Khadgar to summon a vision of the past. Together they peered into the flow of time, witnessing a haunting scene. In the vision, the warlock Gul'dan knelt as he received instructions from a shadowed figure who called himself the Guardian. Khadgar and Garona's worst fears were confirmed. The Guardian was Medivh. Horrified by their discovery, the pair fled Karazhan, determined to bring this dire news to King Lane and his knight champion, Anduin Lothar. Lothar, a man of decisive action, believed their tale without hesitation. King Lane, however, required time to consider the gravity of the accusation. Unwilling to wait, Lothar took matters into his own hands. In the stillness of pre-dawn, he roused Garona and Khadgar from their quarters. Quietly, he led them to one of Stormwind Keep's towering spires, where a group of griffins awaited them, which were gifts from the dwarves of Khaz Modan. Accompanied by a small contingent of loyal footmen, Lothar prepared for an urgent journey to Karazhan, entrusting the defense of Stormwind City to Gavinrad the Dire in his absence. The company soared through the skies, reaching the ominous spire of Karazhan with haste. Inside, they found no trace of Medivh. The tower seemed eerily vacant, its halls whispering with an unnatural stillness. Just as they prepared to leave, Garona discovered a concealed door hidden among the shadows. The passage led to an inverted reflection of Karazhan, a bizarre otherworldly mirror of the tower above. Descending into this labyrinth, the group triggered one of Medivh's many arcane traps. A horde of demonic beasts materialized, barring their path. Lothar and his men held the creatures at bay in a desperate fight, their swords flashing as they battled against overwhelming odds. Meanwhile, Khadgar and Garona pressed forward, venturing deeper into the twisted corridors of the inverse tower. Finally, their journey ended in a strange mirrored observatory. There, standing at the heart of this arcane chaos, was Medivh himself. Medivh stood before Khadgar and Garona, his presence radiating an unhealthy menace. His voice, both calm and terrible, confirmed their worst fears. He was not merely Medivh, the guardian of Tirisfal, but Sargeras, the fallen titan, whose dark influence had twisted the mage's soul. The war with the Orcish Horde was not merely a coincidence, but part of a plan centuries in the making. Free Sargeras' physical form from his tomb, and bring about the utter annihilation of Azeroth. As Medivh revealed his sinister intentions, Garona, unable to bear his words any longer, lunged at him with her dagger. But the magus, ever vigilant, turned her assault aside with a spell, sending her reeling backward. The battle began in earnest, with Khadgar and Garona throwing everything they had at the corrupted Guardian. Yet Medivh's power, amplified by the essence of Sargeras, was far beyond their capabilities. The duo fought valiantly, but it wasn't long before they were beaten down, kneeling and bloodied, their strength nearly spent. Medivh raised his hand, arcane energy crackling as he prepared to deliver a killing blow to Khadgar. But at that very moment, the clash of steel echoed through the chamber as Anduin Lothar arrived. His blade glinted in the unnatural light, and with a roar he charged his former friend, forcing Medivh to shift his focus. The duel between Lothar and Medivh was fierce and heart-wrenching. Lothar fought not just for Azeroth, but against the man who had once been his closest ally. Yet even Lothar's unmatched skill in battle was no match for Medivh's dark magic. As the fight wore on, Lothar was gravely wounded, staggering but defiant. His intervention, however, had given Khadgar a chance. While Medivh was preoccupied, Khadgar moved silently through the shadows, positioning himself for a final strike. The magus, sensing victory, turned back to where Khadgar had fallen, only to find the young mage gone. Before he could react, Khadgar emerged from the shadows, his rune-inscribed sword aimed at Medivh's heart. Without hesitation, Khadgar plunged the blade into the Guardian's chest, dealing a mortal blow. As Medivh faltered, the room erupted with a dreadful howl. Sargeras, the Demon Lord, began to tear free from Medivh's dying body, his dark essence clawing at reality. But before the Titan could fully emerge, Lothar, mustering the last of his strength, swung his sword in a final decisive stroke, severing Medivh's head. With that, Sargeras' essence dissipated into nothingness, and Medivh, the once great guardian, fell silent forever. He became the first Guardian of Tirisfal to die in combat in centuries. Medivh's death sent shockwaves across Azeroth. Gul'dan, who had been mentally probing Medivh's mind at the moment of his death, fell into a deep coma, leaving the Horde leaderless. Orgrim Doomhammer, ever optimistic, seized the moment. He challenged Blackhand for leadership of the Horde in a brutal duel of supremacy and emerged victorious. With Blackhand slain, Orgrim assumed command of the Horde, setting the stage for a new and bloodier chapter to the war. The Orcish Horde gathered like a storm on the horizon, brimming with savage anticipation. The moment of destiny was upon them. The growls of wolf riders echoed through the air as they spurred their monstrous mounts into a bloodthirsty frenzy. The ground trembled under the weight of the war machines as catapults were heaved into position, their payloads of fiery destruction ready to rain upon the human stronghold. Under the iron leadership of Orgrim Doomhammer, the Horde unleashed its fury upon Stormwind Keep. The catapults roared to life, hurling flaming boulders that shattered walls and set the city ablaze. The bulk of the Horde surged forward like a relentless tide, hammering the main gate, while the ruthless Blackrock clan stormed the eastern wall, their war cries piercing the night. Within moments, the grand halls of Stormwind were illuminated by the flickering flames of destruction, shadows writhing on the stone walls as if the keep itself were alive with despair. Inside, the militia scrambled to combat the inferno, their strength stretched thin as they fought to save their home. Yet even as the defenders struggled, a darker deed was unfolding within the keep. Garona, the half-orc emissary, moved silently through the chaos. Due to Medivh's mind games and Gul'dan's lingering hold on her mind, she was compelled to follow the orders set out by the Shadow Council. She sought out King Lane. Her mission was clear. As long as a strong heart sat on Stormwind's throne, the resolve of the people would not waver. Under the pretense of delivering her report, Garona struck. With swift precision, she assassinated King Lane, silencing the heart of the kingdom. But she was unaware that Varian had witnessed her murder his father. But while Varian wanted revenge, he couldn't understand why Garona had tears streaming down her face as she committed the act. She had grown to see King Lane as a friend, but couldn't stop herself from killing him. The light in his eyes faded as the blow landed. The spirit of Stormwind's defenders was extinguished. Word of the king's death spread like wildfire, and the morale of the soldiers crumbled. Without their steadfast leader, the men faltered, and the tide of the Horde became unstoppable. As dawn broke over the smoldering ruins, Stormwind Keep lay in the hands of the Orcish Horde. The once proud city had fallen, and its defenders were scattered or slain. The death of King Lane marked the end of an era for the Kingdom of Stormwind, and the Horde's victory heralded the beginning of a dark chapter for Azeroth. Yet even in the shadow of defeat, whispers of defiance lingered, seeds of hope that would one day rise from the ashes of despair. And that's going to do it for this one. I don't ask for this very often, but if you did enjoy it, maybe consider liking and subscribing. It helps the channel out. But with all that said, hopefully you did enjoy. I'll see you in the next one. Do take care of yourself. Driven by a vision to reshape the Horde into an honorable and unified force, Orgrim Doomhammer sought to root out the corruption festering within its ranks. His suspicions turned to Garona, whose dual heritage made her a pawn to powers beyond her control. Capturing her, Orgrim subjected her to relentless interrogation. Her mixed blood made her less resilient to pain than her Orcish kin, and it wasn't long before she broke under the strain, revealing the Shadow Council's existence and its secret location. Armed with this knowledge, Orgrim wasted no time. He stormed into the Council's clandestine meeting, his fury as unrelenting as his hammer. The warlocks who had wielded power from the shadows for so long found themselves powerless against his might. One by one, Orgrim struck them down, their twisted magic no match for his righteous path. Only a handful survived the slaughter, Shogal, the cunning ogre mage, and Gul'dan, the mastermind of the council, among them. Though Orgrim despised Gul'dan, he recognized the necessity of compromise. The Horde's future demanded strength, and Gul'dan's dark power could still be of use. Reluctantly, Orgrim struck an uneasy alliance with the warlock, binding him under strict terms that ensured Gul'dan's ambitions would remain leashed. For now. With the Shadow Council dismantled and Gul'dan brought to heel, Orgrim turned his gaze outward. The foundations of a new Horde were laid, one tempered by Orgrim's vision of strength and discipline. The preparations for the Second War began in earnest, the echoes of the first conflict still fresh in their minds of all who had survived. As the drums of war beat once more, Orgrim Doomhammer stood at the helm of the Horde, determined to lead it into an era of conquest and perhaps redemption. The path ahead would be fraught with peril, betrayal, and bloodshed. But for Orgrim, the dream of a united and honorable horde was worth every sacrifice. With Stormwind in ruins and the horde's forces overwhelming, Anduin and Lothar faced a grim reality. There was no victory to be had. The kingdom of Stormwind was lost. Yet even in the face of such despair, Lothar refused to surrender entirely. Rallying the battered remnants of the army and as many civilians as he could, he led a desperate exodus across the sea. Their destination was the northern kingdom of Lordaeron, where Lothar hoped to gain the aid of King Tyrannus Menethil II. The retreat was fraught with peril. Not all survivors could escape in time, and among the pursuing horde was the orcish hunter Zigris, who became a dark legend for his ruthless pursuit of fleeing refugees. Zigris hunted the defenseless for sport, his cruelty adding to the list of horrors that haunted the survivors. Upon reaching Lordaeron, Lothar delivered an impassioned plea to King Tyrannus and his court, recounting the horrors of the horde and the stakes for all of humanity. His speech galvanized the king, who immediately called for an emergency council of war. In a masterful display of diplomacy, Tyrannus petitioned the rulers of Stromgarde, Quel'Thalas, Alterac, Gilneas, and the magical city of Dalaran to unite against the orcish threat. The response was mixed. Most of the human nations pledged their allegiance to the burgeoning alliance, recognizing that unity was their only hope of survival. Yet there were dissenters. King Pyrrhinold of Alterac hesitated, his fear of the horde's might outweighing his loyalty to humanity. King Gengramian of Gilneas, ever proud and isolationist, believed his kingdom could stand alone and withheld his support. Despite these cracks in unity, the alliance was forged and preparations for the Second War began in earnest. Years after the war's end, a solemn monument was erected to honor those who had fallen in defense of Azeroth. The Stone of Remembrance, standing proudly at Heroes' Vigil in the heart of the Stone Cairn Lake, became a symbol of sacrifice and resilience. Its inscription served as a reminder of the countless lives lost and the courage of those who stood against overwhelming odds, ensuring that their memory would endure through the ages. Warchief Orgrim Doomhammer sought to understand his enemy beyond the battlefield. From captured prisoners, he gleaned valuable insights into human culture and politics, eventually grasping the immense strategic and symbolic value of Lordaeron's capital city. Its fall would shatter human morale and solidify the Horde's dominance, but such an ambitious conquest required mightier weapons than the Horde currently possessed. 4 years had passed since the orcs first set foot on Azeroth, and constant war had taken its toll. The Horde's once great strength was now stretched thin, and their efforts to scavenge Stormwind's ruins yielded little of value. The kingdom's infrastructure was in shambles, offering no easy means to rebuild their war machine. But amidst these challenges, hope stirred in the form of the Dragonmaw clan. In their relentless pursuit of power, the Dragonmaw had unearthed a relic of unimaginable power, the Demon Soul, an ancient artifact forged in the fires of the War of the Ancients. Though its true power remained locked away, its potential was undeniable. Tasked with unraveling its secrets, Necros Skullcrusher began the painstaking work of unlocking the artifact's full destructive capabilities. With time, Doomhammer believed the Demon Soul would tip the scales in the Horde's favor, paving the way for the conquest of Lordaeron and the total subjugation of Azeroth. The orcs had recently forged a tenuous alliance with the Amani forest trolls, a savage tribe whose hatred for humanity burned as fiercely as the orcs' thirst for conquest. News of Stormwind's destruction was met with glee by the trolls, who eagerly pledged their support to the Horde's war efforts. However, their loyalty came with a condition. Warchief Doomhammer would first need to rescue their imprisoned leader, Zul'Dare. He was being held captive near the human settlement of Hillsbrad. Around the same time, the warlock Gul'dan stirred from the magical coma that had claimed him during the First War, a result of his ill-fated attempt to probe the mind of the fallen guardian, Medivh. Doomhammer, who had already purged the Shadow Council and much of Gul'dan's network of warlocks, was determined to finish the job and rid the Horde of their poisonous influence. But Gul'dan begged for his life and offered a proposition in exchange for his survival. Denying any allegiance to the demonic Burning Legion, the warlock promised to create warriors of unparalleled strength, beings that would rival humanity's most skilled magi and clerics. Skeptical but intrigued, Doomhammer allowed Gul'dan to prove his worth. To this end, he sanctioned the creation of a new clan, the Storm Reavers. Under Gul'dan's leadership, this new faction would channel the dark magic needed to forge Doomhammer's secret weapon, though the war chief's distrust of the warlock remained as sharp as ever. It was a dangerous gamble, but in war, Doomhammer knew even the most treacherous tools could sometimes serve a purpose. True to his word, but with a cunning twist, Gul'dan set about crafting the new warriors he had promised. His plan, however, was riddled with treachery, as he sought to ensure their loyalty would belong to him alone. Alongside his ogre lieutenant Cho'Gall, Gul'dan gathered the spirits of his fallen Shadow Council. While the orcs held their dead as sacred, human corpses, abundant in the wake of the Horde's conquests, would serve as perfect vessels for these vengeful souls. Through his grim rituals, Gul'dan achieved his goal. The spirit of Terran Gore, once a powerful orc, was bound to the body of a fallen human knight. From this macabre union rose Terran Khan, now known as Terran Gorefiend, the first of the Death Knights. These twisted creations wielded the chilling power of necromancy instead of fell magic. Their grotesque forms and violent nature a blight even Doomhammer found revolting. Yet, the war chief could not deny their effectiveness. In the face of looming war, the Horde would need every weapon it could muster, no matter how unholy. As Doomhammer rallied ogre enforcers to bolster his forces, a harsh reality loomed. Many of the Horde's warriors on the other side of the Dark Portal could not be mobilized in time for the coming conflict. Turning his gaze closer to home, Doomhammer set his sights on the dwarven kingdom of Khaz Modan. The forges and mines of the dwarves promised the materials the Horde needed to replenish its dwindling supplies of weapons and resources. The home of the Bronzebeard clan within the rugged mountains of Khaz Modan was a land of untold wealth. Rich veins of metal ore crisscrossed its depths. Reservoirs of oil lay waiting to be tapped, and the mighty forges of the dwarves produced weapons and armor of unparalleled quality. For the Horde, it was a treasure trove of resources, one that could fuel their war machine and secure their dominance. Recognizing the strategic value of Khaz Modan, Doomhammer made a bold decision. Before turning the Horde's fury northward toward Lordaeron, the dwarven stronghold would have to fall. A full-scale invasion was unleashed upon the region, as orcish warbands swept across the mountains, seeking to wrest control of its riches from the Bronzebeards. The battle for Khaz Modan had begun, and the dwarves would soon face the unstoppable tide of the Horde's ambition. 6 years after the Dark Portal had first opened, the Horde's war machine rumbled into Khaz Modan, braving a ferocious blizzard that blanketed the mountains in ice and snow. The dwarves of the Bronzebeard clan, however, were far from unprepared. Anticipating the orcs' advance, demolition teams expertly collapsed mountain tunnels and passes, forcing the Horde to navigate a labyrinth of obstacles. At the same time, the dwarves called upon their steadfast allies, the gnomes of Gnomergon, to join the defense. Together, the two races pooled their ingenuity and resources, fortifying defensive positions throughout the rugged terrain of the region. Yet even with their skill and determination, the alliance of dwarves and gnomes struggled to stem the Horde's relentless tide. Outnumbered and facing an enemy of brutal strength, their fortified outposts and settlements fell one by one, engulfed by the fury of the orcish advance. The snowy slopes of Khaz Modan became battlefields soaked in blood, with hundreds of defenders sacrificing their lives to protect their homeland. As the ferocity of the Horde's assault proved too much to withstand, the defenders were forced to make a grim decision. The dwarves retreated to the safety of their ancient mountain city of Ironforge, while the gnomes withdrew to their home in Gnomergon. Though the heart of their civilization endured behind unyielding stone and steel, much of Khaz Modan lay in ruin, a grim testament to the unstoppable might of the orcish horde. Doomhammer turned his full attention to Ironforge, the impenetrable mountain bastion of the Bronzebeard dwarves. To him, the dwarves posed the greater threat, and he believed their destruction would break the remaining resistance in Khaz Modan. The Horde quickly laid siege to the subterranean stronghold surrounding the mountain city in a brutal campaign of attrition. Within Ironforge, the dwarves knew this was their final stand. Determined to defend their ancestral home to the last, nearly the entire population took up arms. Miners, blacksmiths, and warriors alike transformed the city into an unyielding fortress. When the Horde's forces stormed Ironforge, they met a ferocious resistance. Every step forward came at a staggering cost. 10 orcs fell for every dwarf brought down. The siege dragged on and the toll on the Horde grew unsustainable. Reluctantly, Doomhammer was forced to concede defeat, ordering his forces to withdraw. Meanwhile, a similar scene played out at Gnomergon. Orcish forces advanced on the gnome city, but the defenders proved more than ready. The gnomes used their ingenuity and advanced technology to devastating effect. Explosive traps rigged in the forest surrounding their city ripped through the orcish ranks, claiming countless lives before the Horde even reached Gnomeregan's gates. When the attackers finally arrived, they were met by the city's colossal iron gate, which withstood weeks of a relentless bombardment by Horde siege engines. Like Ironforge, Gnomeregan remained unconquered, and the siege was eventually abandoned. The twin defeats at Ironforge and Gnomeregan were a bitter blow to Doomhammer's campaign in Khaz Modan. Though the Horde had claimed much of the region, the unyielding resistance of the dwarves and gnomes ensured that their mountain citadels remained untouchable, standing as proud symbols of defiance in the face of the Horde's might. The siege of Ironforge and Gnomeregan had bled the Horde dry of time and manpower, but Doomhammer understood that victory did not require the cities to fall. The wealth of Khaz Modan's resources, its abundant metal ores, oil, and forges, were already in his grasp. It was a prize worth the cost. Rather than waste more lives on futile assaults, Doomhammer redeployed his forces strategically. The Bleeding Hollow clan was stationed outside both Ironforge and Gnomeregan, tasking with keeping the dwarves and gnomes bottled up in their mountain strongholds for the remainder of the war. This blockade ensured the defenders could not interfere with the Horde's greater plans. Meanwhile, the Horde smiths set to work, exploiting Khaz Modan's riches to forge vast quantities of weapons, armor, and siege engines. Under the unrelenting heat of commandeered forges, the Orc war machine roared to life, stronger than ever. With their armors now fully equipped and bolstered by the spoils of the dwarves' homeland, the Horde moved one step closer to achieving its ultimate goal, the total conquest of Azeroth. While the Horde forged its war machine in the south, the human leaders of Azeroth convened in Lordaeron's grand capital city. The Council of Seven Nations was a gathering unlike any other in history, bringing together the rulers of humanity's fractured kingdoms to debate the growing Orcish threat and the prospect of unity in the face of annihilation. In attendance were King Tyrannus Menethil II of Lordaeron, King Gen Greymane of Gilneas, Lord Admiral Dalen Proudmoore of Quel'Thalas, King Aiden Perinold of Alterac, Archmage Antonidas of Dalaran, and King Thoris Trollbane of Stromgarde. Representing the fallen kingdom of Stormwind was Sir Anduin Lothar, the Lion of Azeroth, whose grim warnings carried the weight of a nation lost to the Horde's wrath. As the council deliberated, refugees from Khaz Modan arrived, bearing news of the Horde's brutal invasion of the Dwarven lands and their inevitable push northward. The reports painted a dire picture, shocking the human rulers and adding new urgency to their discussions. King Tyrannus and Anduin Lothar pressed relentlessly for unity, arguing that only a united alliance of all humanity could hope to stand against the Horde's overwhelming might. Their appeals found strong allies in Lord Admiral Proudmoore, whose bond of friendship with Lothar made him a staunch supporter. King Thoris Trollbane, whose close ties with Lordaeron reinforced his commitment to the cause. Archmage Antonidas, having studied the Horde's dark power and witnessed their destructive potential, also lent his voice in favor of an alliance. Yet the path to unity was not without obstacles. Centuries of rivalry and mistrust lingered between the kingdoms, and some leaders remained wary of sacrificing their sovereignty. Even so, the tide of opinion began to shift, driven by the undeniable threat of the Orcish Horde looming ever closer. The Council of Seven Nations would soon shape the fate of humanity and of Azeroth itself. Amid the growing calls for unity, two voices stood firmly opposed, King Gen Greymane of Gilneas and King Aiden Perinold of Alterac. Their initial resistance stemmed from doubt. Both rulers questioned whether the Orcs truly posed a threat significant enough to warrant a grand alliance. But as the reports of the Horde's brutality grew harder to ignore, their objections shifted to something more self-serving: the fear of losing regional power in a unified front. For Perinold, the stakes were especially grim. Deep down, he harbored a crippling fear that humanity had no real chance of defeating the Horde. To him, resistance seemed futile, and he was unwilling to risk his kingdom for what he saw as a hopeless cause. Greymane, on the other hand, cloaked his defiance in pride, confident in Gilneas' isolationist policies and the strength of its defenses. He insisted the kingdom would stand alone, unaided, against any threat. While the rest of the council debated unity as humanity's only path to survival, these two kings clung to their fears and pride, casting long shadows over the council's efforts. Their reluctance underscored the deep divisions that had always plagued the human kingdoms, divisions that the Alliance would need to overcome if it were to stand a chance against the Horde's relentless advance. Tensions within the Council of Seven Nations reached a breaking point as heated arguments threatened to tear the fragile discussions apart. King Gen Greymane and Aiden Perinold, frustrated and defiant, came dangerously close to abandoning the negotiations altogether. The prospect of unity seemed to crumble under the weight of mistrust and pride. It was then that Turalyon, one of Lordaeron's most revered priests, rose to speak. Standing tall with Stormwind's young prince, Varian Wrynn, at his side, Thoralian's voice cut through the chaos like a beacon of light. In an impassioned and heartfelt address, he painted a grim picture of what lay ahead if humanity remained divided. Using Stormwind's fall as a dire warning, he urged the gathered rulers to look beyond their pride and ambition, reminding them that humanity's survival depended on its unity. With fervor and conviction, Thoralian invoked the shared virtues of all humankind: bravery, devotion, and leadership. He spoke of these qualities as the very foundation of their strength, proof that together they could overcome even the might of the Horde. His words resonated deeply, silencing the room and commanding the attention of even the most skeptical leaders. As he concluded, the hall erupted into applause. Thoralian's speech had broken through the barriers of doubt and distrust, inspiring even the most reluctant kings to reconsider. That very day, the council cast their votes, and for the first time in history, humanity's kingdoms came together as one. The Alliance of Lordaeron was born, a united force forged in hope, courage, and the shared resolve to face the Horde's onslaught head-on. It was swiftly decided that Anduin Lothar, the Lion of Azeroth, was the ideal choice to lead the Alliance's military. Hailing from the fallen kingdom of Stormwind, Lothar held a unique neutrality among the squabbling nations, making him a unifying figure in a time of great division. When the mantle of Supreme Commander of the Alliance was placed upon him, Lothar accepted it with humility, but also with a deep awareness of the monumental responsibility he now bore. Few in history could claim to command the combined might of all humanity's kingdoms, a force unprecedented in scale and purpose. Lothar's first act as Supreme Commander was decisive. He ordered the armies of the Alliance to gather in the Hillsbrad foothills, a key region standing between the Horde and the northern kingdoms. There, the disparate forces would begin training, fortifying their defenses, and preparing to meet the Orcish advance. Yet even as the armies rallied, Lothar recognized the need for something greater, an ideal to inspire unity and purpose among the diverse cultures and traditions of the Alliance. The solution came from the Church of the Holy Light. Archbishop Alonzus Fowl, an ally of Lothar and a revered spiritual leader, proposed the creation of a new kind of champion, warrior priests who could embody the virtues of the light while standing firm on the battlefield. A handful of knights and other chosen individuals were trained intensively in both martial combat and the divine teachings of the light. These men and women would represent the highest ideals of humanity: courage, faith, and selflessness. This new order of warrior priests became known as the Knights of the Silver Hand, a shining symbol of hope for the Alliance. Their formation marked a turning point, giving the armies of humanity not just a cause to fight for, but heroes to rally behind. With the armies gathering and the Paladins ready to take the field, the Alliance stood poised to face the Horde, united in purpose and brimming with newfound strength. Archbishop Alonzus Fowl subjected the fledgling Paladins to a grueling and unrelenting training program, forging them into warriors as steadfast in combat as they were in their faith. When the Alliance army began massing in the Hillsbrad foothills, the Paladins marched alongside them, gleaming symbols of hope and divine strength amid the gathering storm. Each Paladin was entrusted with a sacred librum personally bestowed by Fowl, a tome embodying a specific virtue they were to uphold. These librums served not only as tools of their devotion, but as constant reminders of the ideals they represented: courage, passion, justice, and sacrifice. The Archbishop's wisdom shone through in his chosen champions, each one a beacon of humanity's shared values. Lothar observed the Paladins' progress with admiration. Their discipline and dedication impressed him deeply, and their effectiveness on the battlefield was undeniable. Recognizing their potential, Lothar selected two of the finest among them, Thoralian and Uther, to serve as his lieutenants. With the Paladins now at the heart of the Alliance's preparations, they became living embodiments of unity and purpose, ready to lead the charge against the Horde's darkness. Under Lothar's command and with the light shining in their ranks, humanity's army grew stronger and more resolute by the day. As the threat of war loomed ever closer, Anduin Lothar worked tirelessly to strengthen the Alliance's forces, seeking aid from any quarter willing to stand against the Horde. His attention turned to Quel'Thalas, the ancient homeland of the High Elves. Drawing upon his heritage as a descendant of King Thoradin, Lothar invoked an ancient oath made by the High Elves during the Troll Wars, a pledge to come to humanity's aid in times of dire need. Yet the High Elves did not see the Horde as their concern. King Anasterian Sunstrider, cautious and aloof, dismissed the Orcish threat as distant and irrelevant to his people's safety. Reluctantly, he fulfilled the bare minimum of his kingdom's ancient obligation, sending a small token fleet to support the Alliance. Despite this lukewarm response, not all High Elves agreed with their king's indifference. Among them was the legendary ranger captain Alleria Windrunner. who defied Anasterian's orders and rallied a band of like-minded elves to join the fight. Driven by a sense of duty and foreboding, Illyria led her rangers south to answer Lothar's call. Though disappointed by Quel'Thalas' lackluster response, Lothar welcomed the elves who did come with open arms. Illyria and her skilled rangers proved invaluable to the Alliance, their precision and expertise a vital asset in the coming battles. Even in the face of reluctance, Lothar's call to arms had stirred a glimmer of hope and solidarity, uniting those willing to fight for the survival of Azeroth. As the human kingdoms rallied their forces in the north, Orgrim Doomhammer and the Horde prepared for their next decisive strike. After carving a bloody path through the wetlands north of Khaz Modan and shattering Dwarven defenses at Dun Algaz and Dun Moder, the Orcs faced a critical obstacle, the Thandal Span. This narrow crossing was the only land route into Lordaeron, a choke point that could be easily fortified and held by the Alliance. Rather than fall into the trap of a direct assault, Doomhammer devised a bold and unexpected plan. The Horde would bypass the Thandal Span entirely by constructing a fleet of warships to launch a surprise invasion into the heart of the human lands. It was an audacious gamble, one that would require convincing the Horde to embrace a strategy far outside their traditional strengths. With the support of Gul'dan and his Stormreaver clan, Doomhammer succeeded in rallying the Orcs to his vision. Construction of the fleet began in earnest along a secluded bay in the southwestern wetlands, a location that would later become known as Menethil Harbor. Though the Orcs had little experience with naval warfare, they adapted swiftly with guidance from their allies. The Ogre's brute strength and the Amani Troll's maritime knowledge proved invaluable, and together they built a crude yet formidable armada of warships. The Horde's fleet, though rough and varied in design, embodied Doomhammer's cunning and resourcefulness. As the vessels took shape, so too did the promise of a devastating attack that would strike fear into the heart of the Alliance and forever alter the course of the war. Despite their efforts to shroud their actions in secrecy, the Horde's construction of a vast fleet was eventually uncovered by human scout ships patrolling the seas. Yet the Orcs remained undeterred, completing their massive vessels with tireless resolve. Doomhammer was certain the Horde would reach Lordaeron before the fledgling alliance of nations could mount a coordinated defense. His gaze was fixed firmly on Lordaeron's capital city, believing that its fall would unravel the alliance and pave the way for Horde dominance. When the fleet was ready, hundreds of ships laden with Orc soldiers, supplies, and war machines departed from the wetlands and began their voyage across the Great Sea toward human territories. However, their progress did not go unnoticed. Naval forces under the command of Admiral Dalen Proudmoore, a seasoned mariner from the island nation of Quel'Thalas, intercepted the Horde near the island of Zul'Dare. The ensuing battle showcased the stark difference between the two fleets. The Orcs' lumbering, hastily constructed ships were no match for the swift and maneuverable vessels of the Quel'Thalas navy. Proudmoore's forces rained devastating cannon volleys upon the Horde, tearing through their wooden hulls with brutal precision. One by one, the Orcish ships were reduced to wreckage, their passengers plunged into the unforgiving depths of the sea. As ship after ship sank beneath the waves and countless Horde warriors drowned, Proudmoore saw an opportunity to end the threat entirely. His forces pressed the attack with renewed vigor, determined to annihilate the Horde fleet before it could reach Lordaeron's shores. Yet Doomhammer had prepared for such an eventuality. He had ordered the Dragonmaw clan to unleash their newly enslaved red dragons as an aerial countermeasure. Though their training as battle mounts was incomplete, the red dragons arrived as the Battle of Zul'Dare raged. Under the command of Necros Skullcrusher, 3 of these mighty creatures descended upon the Alliance fleet, their fiery breath turning Proudmoore's ships into blazing infernos. The tide of the battle shifted in an instant. Alliance ships burned as their crews scrambled in desperation, unable to respond to the airborne assault. Faced with mounting losses and unable to combat the dragons, Admiral Proudmoore made the difficult decision to retreat. The Alliance fleet scattered, leaving the Horde's remaining ships to sail onward unchallenged. Though battered, the Horde fleet survived and continued its relentless march toward Lordaeron, carrying with it the promise of war and destruction. With their decisive victory at Zul'Dare, the Horde secured an uncontested landing in the Hillsbrad foothills. The region, ill-prepared for such an invasion, offered little resistance. As human forces scrambled to respond, their efforts descended into disarray. Unable to muster a coherent defense, Doomhammer marched his entire army inland. Though the enslaved red dragons refused to continue their slaughter of humans and remained behind, the Horde pressed on, seizing territory with ruthless efficiency. Doomhammer's forces advanced towards the Alterac Mountains, a treacherous but direct route to Lordaeron's capital city. Supreme Commander Anduin Lothar, predicting the Horde's movements, hastily ordered the Alliance to block their path. While the northern and western routes to the capital were now fortified, the human armies were in a fragile state, their morale shaken by the Horde's seemingly unstoppable ferocity and numbers. However, their spirits were bolstered by the arrival of the newly trained Paladins of the Knights of the Silver Hand, who rode among them like beacons of hope. The stage was set for a confrontation unlike any before. In the shadows of the Alterac peaks, the full strength of the Horde clashed with the united might of the Alliance for the first time. The battlefield erupted in chaos as the two forces collided. Despite their brittle state, the Alliance held their ground. Lothar's Paladins, wielding the light with righteous fury, inspired their comrades to fight on. Alleria Windrunner's elite elven rangers unleashed deadly volleys of arrows, felling scores of orcs with precision. From behind the lines, the Magi of the Kirin Tor, led by Khadgar, unleashed arcane devastation, turning the skies and earth into weapons against the Horde. Yet as the battle reached its zenith, an eerie shift blanketed the field. A dense, unnatural fog rolled in, cold and heavy with the scent of decay. It crept across the bodies of the fallen Alliance soldiers, and wherever the mist touched, the dead rose once more. These reanimated warriors, twisted into grotesque forms of undeath, turned their weapons on their former comrades. Amidst the chaos, a new chilling foe revealed itself: the Death Knights. Cloaked in shadow, these harbingers of despair rode atop skeletal steeds, commanding the reanimated dead with malevolent precision. The Alliance forces, already strained, now faced a horror beyond comprehension. The Horde's assault, bolstered by the unholy might of the Death Knights, threatened to overwhelm even the most stalwart defenders. Yet despite the terror and carnage, the Alliance stood firm. Their unity and resilience tested like never before. The battle in the shadow of the Alterac Mountains was more than a clash of armies. It was a harrowing glimpse into the dark forces that sought to engulf Azeroth in despair. The Death Knights, unholy champions of the Horde, were a terrifying force to behold. Wielding dark necromantic magics, they unleashed devastation upon the battlefield. Their spells turned the fallen into relentless undead minions, and their very presence exuded a malevolent aura that seeped into the hearts of their enemies. For the human soldiers of the Alliance, the sight of these mounted harbingers of death, wreathed in shadow and malice, was more than just a physical threat. It was a psychological assault. Fear and despair spread like wildfire, causing the Alliance lines to waver and falter under the relentless pressure. But just as the tide seemed on the brink of turning irreversibly in the Horde's favor, the Paladins of the Knights of the Silver Hand charged into the fray. Wielding the radiant power of the light, their arrival was like a dawn breaking through the darkest of nights. Their presence steadied the faltering Alliance ranks, rekindling hope where despair had taken root. Holy energy blazed from their weapons, cutting through the undead ranks and dispelling the Death Knights' vile myths. Turalyon, Uther the Lightbringer, and their fellow Paladins moved through the chaos with purpose. Their divine power healed the wounded, fortifying the resolve of the Alliance forces and rallying them to fight on. Under their leadership, the human soldiers shook off their initial terror, their courage reignited by the sight of these holy warriors standing unyielding against the darkness. With their morale restored and their ranks reformed, the Alliance launched a counterattack. United under the inspirational aura of the Paladins, the soldiers surged forward, crashing into the Horde lines with newfound ferocity. Steel met steel and the battlefield roared with renewed vigor of the Alliance. The Horde's momentum faltered, their dark champions no longer able to sow chaos unchecked. What began as a near collapse transformed into a rallying victory for the Alliance. The light of hope borne by the Paladins proved stronger than the shadows cast by the Death Knights, and the Alliance forces stood firm against the Horde's darkness. As the conflict dragged on, the once fierce clashes in Hillsbrad devolved into a grinding stalemate. Skirmishes erupted sporadically across the region, but neither side could claim decisive superiority. Though evenly matched for the moment, Doomhammer knew that time was not on the Horde's side. The Alliance's capacity to summon reinforcements from their far-flung kingdoms grew stronger with each passing day. Determined to outmaneuver his foes, Doomhammer sought an alternative route to Lordaeron's capital city, one that bypassed the heavily defended front lines. His solution lay to the east, through the dense forest and untamed lands under the shadow of the Amani trolls. But traversing such a path required allies who knew the region intimately. The Amani trolls, long embittered by their grudges against humanity and their high elven rivals, agreed to guide the Horde. On one condition: the orcs would first make good on their promise to liberate the captured Amani warlord, Zul'Dare. When scouts located Zul'Dare imprisoned in a camp near Durnhold Keep, Doomhammer acted swiftly. He organized a raiding party of seasoned warriors who descended upon the prison with ruthless precision. The defenders, unprepared for such a ferocious assault, were quickly overwhelmed. Zul'Dare was freed, his chains shattered, and the warlords stood before Doomhammer, a symbol of the troll people's resilience. In return, Doomhammer extended an invitation. The Amani would have a permanent place within the Horde, their strength bolstering the Orcish ranks as they marched toward domination. At first, Zul'Dare scoffed at the offer. To him, an alliance with the Horde reeked of servitude, a path that would make his people subordinate to Orcish ambitions. Doomhammer, however, assured the troll leader of his autonomy, promising that the Amani would stand as equals and not underlings. Still, Zul'Dare demanded one further guarantee. If the trolls joined the Horde, the Orcs must help them destroy their ancient enemies, the High Elves of Quel'Thalas. Doomhammer understood the weight of this condition. The path to Quel'Thalas would take his forces farther north than he had initially planned, delaying his ultimate assault on Capital City. But he also recognized the precariousness of his position. The Alliance's forces were vast, its leadership formidable, and the Horde needed every advantage it could muster. Reluctantly, the war chief agreed to Zul'Dare's terms, forging a pact that would forever change the course of the war. With the Amani trolls as allies, the Horde now had the means to navigate the perilous eastern routes and strike at the High Elven Kingdom. The campaign ahead would be brutal and unrelenting. But for Doomhammer, securing victory required bold moves and unlikely alliances. The Horde's march toward dominance over Azeroth continued, its ranks swelling with a shared thirst for vengeance and conquest. With their preparations complete, the Horde began its eastern march, the path ahead fraught with peril and opportunity. A formidable rearguard of Blackrock orcs, led by the fearsome Varrock Sourfang, ensured the safety of the main force as they navigated the treacherous mountain pass into the Hinterlands. Guided by the Amani trolls, the Horde advanced swiftly through the dense, untamed forests, their sights set on Quel'Thalas. Along the way, Zul'Dare called upon every nearby Amani warband, rallying his people to join the march for vengeance against their ancient enemies. For a time, the Horde's advance was unhindered. The trolls' deep knowledge of the Hinterlands allowed the army to avoid natural hazards and bypass hostile terrain. But the relative calm was shattered when dark shapes appeared in the skies above, winged figures that were not the Horde's red dragons. These were the Griffin Riders of the Wildhammer dwarves, the fierce and reclusive defenders of the region. The Wildhammers, isolated in their mountain stronghold of Airy Peak, had little knowledge of the Horde or its warpath until the Orcs entered their domain. Viewing the invading force as a real threat to their safety, the Wildhammers wasted no time in striking back. Led by Curdrin Wildhammer, the dwarves descended from the skies on their mighty griffins, raining enchanted stormhammers upon the Horde. The attacks were relentless. The dwarves struck with precision, diving in from above and retreating to the safety of their peaks before the Orcs could respond. The Stormhammers, imbued with shamanic power, wreaked havoc among the Horde's ranks, scattering formations and leaving destruction in their wake. The Wildhammer's fierce griffins soared unchallenged, as the Horde's dragons had been left behind with the fleet, leaving the Orcs vulnerable to aerial assaults. The Horde, unprepared for such a foe, suffered heavy casualties. Entire battalions were whittled down under the dwarves' unyielding bombardment. Despite their formidable strength and discipline, the Orcs could find no reliable way to counter the Wildhammer's aerial tactics. Each passing day saw the Horde's numbers dwindle as they pushed deeper into hostile territory. Yet, even as losses mounted, the Horde pressed on, driven by Doomhammer's resolve and the promise of vengeance shared with their Amani allies. The journey to Quel'Thalas was proving far more arduous than anticipated, but the Horde's determination to claim victory, and the Wildhammer's commitment to their land, set the stage for a fierce and unpredictable confrontation in the battles yet to come. To resolve the relentless threat posed by the Wildhammer dwarves, Doomhammer launched a daring assault on Airy Peak itself. The towering mountain stronghold home to the Griffin Riders was the heart of the Wildhammer resistance. With the capital under direct threat, the Wildhammers recalled all their forces to defend their home. But Doomhammer's attack was more than a straightforward siege, it was a calculated diversion. As the Wildhammers concentrated their strength on the battle outside Airy Peak's gates, Doomhammer led half his forces away from the fray under the cover of chaos. Slipping northward undetected, he left the remainder of the Horde to maintain the assault on the Hinterlands, ensuring the dwarves and their allies remained occupied. It was at this pivotal moment that Anduin Lothar arrived at the head of the Alliance army. Marching into the Hinterlands, he swiftly joined forces with the embattled Wildhammers. Together, the combined might of the Alliance and the Griffin Riders broke the Horde's siege. The Orcs, caught between two determined forces, were driven back into the dense forests of the Hinterlands. Grateful for the Alliance's timely intervention, Kurgan Wildhammer pledged his people to their cause. The Griffin Riders of Airy Peak, with their Stormhammers and unparalleled aerial prowess, became a critical addition to the Alliance's arsenal. Their arrival was especially welcomed by Lothar, who had long worried over the Horde's aerial dominance bolstered by their Dragon Riders. However, the victory at Airy Peak came with sobering news. Kurgan informed Lothar of the Horde force that had slipped north under Doomhammer's command. The revelation filled the Alliance commander with dread, for it was clear that the war chief had outmaneuvered them. Lothar acted quickly, dispatching his trusted lieutenant Turalian along with a significant portion of the Alliance army to pursue the escaped Horde forces. Meanwhile, Lothar and the remaining Alliance troops stayed in the Hinterlands to finish what the Horde had started. The orcs left behind would not be allowed to regroup or reinforce their warpath. With the routes through the Alterac mountains securely blocked, it seemed the remaining paths to Lordaeron's capital were safe for now. Yet the warchief's cunning move left the Alliance uneasy. Doomhammer was on the march, and the stakes for Azeroth had never been higher. Doomhammer and his formidable force marched unimpeded toward the shimmering spires of Quel'Thalas, the heart of the High Elven Kingdom. Having outmaneuvered the Alliance army in the Hinterlands, the Horde pressed forward with grim determination. Their path took them through the shadowed forest of Zul'Dare, the ancient capital of the Amani trolls. Here, warlord Zul'Dare seized the opportunity to rally his people for vengeance. Entering the sacred city, Zul'Dare's fiery words ignited the long smoldering hatred of the Amani trolls against their ancient adversaries. Thousands of forest trolls, driven into a frenzy, poured out of Zul'Dare to join the Horde. Their war cries echoed through the forest as they marched alongside Doomhammer's army, their shared purpose of conquest and retribution binding them together. As the Horde advanced, they smashed through the outer defenses of Quel'Thalas with devastating ease. The High Elves, though skilled in their craft, were unprepared for an army of such overwhelming size and ferocity. Villages and fortifications that had stood for centuries were reduced to rubble, their defenders cut down under the relentless tide of orcs and trolls. The citizens of Quel'Thalas, accustomed to their secluded paradise, had never faced an army of this scale. Yet as the Horde drove deeper into elven lands, something unusual began to occur. The spells cast by their warlocks, death knights, and other magic users grew progressively weaker, their potency draining with each step closer to the kingdom's heart. This unexpected phenomenon puzzled the Horde leaders until Gul'dan uncovered the cause. The source of their diminishing magic was the Bandinorial, or Gatekeeper, a massive magical shield woven into the fabric of Quel'Thalas thousands of years ago. Anchored by a network of ancient runestones, the Bandinorial served as a dual-purpose defense. It cloaked the kingdom's immense arcane energies from the detection of outside forces, most notably the Burning Legion, and simultaneously weakened the powers of any foreign magic wielders who dared to trespass. For the Horde, this included their troll allies and the feared Death Knights. As the Horde pressed onward, the Bandinorial vastly hindered their momentum. Yet Doomhammer was undeterred. The Horde's might was more than magic. It was brute strength, cunning strategy, and an unbreakable resolve. Even as their spells faltered, the army surged forward, determined to bring Quel'Thalas to its knees and carve their place in the books of history. Though wary of Gul'dan's motives, Doomhammer reluctantly granted the warlock and his followers permission to dismantle the ancient runestones of Quel'Thalas. Gul'dan assured him that breaking the stones would eliminate the magical dampening effect weakening the Horde's spellcasters. Driven by ambition and arcane hunger, Gul'dan and his acolytes wasted no time, targeting one of the massive stones and reducing it to rubble. But Gul'dan's intent went far beyond simply restoring the Horde's magic. From the shattered remains of the runestone, his lieutenant Shogal began a dark and intricate ritual, harnessing the immense power imbued within the stone. Shogal performed a great feat of terrifying ingenuity, transforming ordinary ogres into two-headed ogre magi. These monstrous creations, gifted with newfound spellcasting prowess, became a devastating addition to the Horde's arsenal. With their raw physical power now enhanced by destructive magic, the ogre magi would soon become a formidable force on the battlefield. With their spellcasters' powers restored and bolstered by the newly created ogre magi, the Horde resumed its unrelenting advance through Quel'Thalas. Villages burned as the orcs and trolls swept across the countryside, leaving a trail of ash and blood in their wake. No mercy was shown and no elf was spared as the Horde cut a swath of destruction towards its ultimate target, the gleaming capital of Silvermoon City. King Anasterian Sunstrider, ruler of Quel'Thalas, called upon his finest generals and warriors to mount a defense. The High Elven forces, though valiant and steeped in centuries of martial tradition, struggled against the sheer ferocity and numbers of the Horde. The defenders braced themselves for the onslaught, their resolve tested as never before. Just as the elves' hope began to waver, salvation arrived in the form of Turalyon and a large alliance army. The banners of humanity, dwarves, and elves united under a common cause, streamed into Quel'Thalas like a tide of light against the Horde's encroaching shadow. With reinforcements at hand, the Alliance and the High Elves prepared to stand together, determined to halt the Horde's advance and save Quel'Thalas from utter annihilation. As Turalyon deployed his forces against the advancing Horde, Alleria Windrunner rode swiftly to Silvermoon City to rally her kin. Arriving before the convocation of Silvermoon, the Ranger made her entrance unforgettable. In a dramatic display, she cast the severed head of a freshly slain forest troll warrior at the feet of King Anasterion Sunstrider. The grim trophy silenced the chamber, its presence a stark reminder of the danger at their footstep. Alleria, her voice resolute and impassioned, implored her king to abandon isolation and join the Alliance to drive the Horde from their sacred lands once and for all. The sight of the troll's head combined with Alleria's fiery plea moved King Anasterion to decisive action. With a mixture of rage and resolve, he called for the full mobilization of Quel'Thalas' military might. The elven war machine, long dormant, roared to life. Archers and rangers trained to perfection joined the fray, their deadly accuracy unmatched. Sleek destroyer ships took to the rivers, their elegant forms hiding deadly firepower, while elven craftsmen bolstered Alliance efforts by supplying the lumber mills. Leading these coordinated efforts was Sylvanas Windrunner, the esteemed Ranger General of Silvermoon, who directed her forces with precision and unwavering dedication. For the first time in centuries, the High Elves and humans fought side by side, united against a common foe. Their combined strength turned the tide, and the Horde began to feel the weight of this newfound alliance pressing against them. The balance of power seemed to shift as Alliance forces pushed back with a fury born of desperation and vengeance. But the Horde had yet to play its most fearsome card. The skies above Quel'Thalas darkened with the shadow of wings as the enslaved red dragonflight descended upon the battlefield. Having mastered their mounts, the Dragon Maw clan unleashed the full might of the dragons, their fiery breath engulfing the battlefield in destruction. Dwarven Griffin riders, unprepared for such an overwhelming foe, found themselves outmatched. The Griffins, though valiant, fell in droves, their riders consumed by dragonfire. The Dragon Riders shattered Alliance ranks, their flames turning soldiers and rangers alike to ash. The destruction wrought by the dragons extended beyond the battlefield. The Horde's relentless march and the dragon's fury ignited much of Quel'Thalas' pristine forests. Eversong Woods, a land of ancient beauty, became a blazing inferno, the smoke from its burning trees rising to blot out the sun. The combined forces of humans and elves had given the Horde pause, but the introduction of the red dragonfly cast a long shadow over their efforts. As the flames of war engulfed Quel'Thalas, the majority of the High Elves retreated to the safety of Silvermoon. Their once proud armies, now battered and scattered, could no longer stand against the relentless advance of the Horde. But where steel had failed, magic offered salvation. Turning to the sacred Sunwell, the heart of their power and culture, Quel'Thalas' sorcerers performed an extraordinary feat. Drawing upon its boundless energies, they conjured a colossal shield that enveloped Silvermoon in an unbreakable barrier. For centuries, the Sunwell had fueled the elf civilization, enabling their mastery of arcane magic and the creation of their great works. Now it became their ultimate defense. Doomhammer's forces hurled themselves against the shield repeatedly, but it stood resolute, shimmering with the golden light of the Sunwell's power. Even the fire of the enslaved red dragons could not penetrate the barrier, leaving the Horde frustrated and stalled outside the city's gates. Doomhammer grew increasingly displeased with this turn of events. Each day spent besieging the elven capital was a day lost in his ultimate mission, the conquest of Lordaeron's capital city. Time was slipping through his fingers, and with every moment the Alliance grew stronger. Though his pact with the Amani trolls to destroy the High Elves remained unfulfilled, Doomhammer made a decisive choice. With the Sunwell shield proving unassailable, and the siege dragging on fruitlessly, he called off the assault on Silvermoon City. The Horde's ambitions turned southward once more, their focus shifting back to the human kingdoms. The path ahead would lead them through the inhospitable Alterac Mountains, a harsh and treacherous terrain that promised its own set of challenges. As the Horde marched away, Quel'Thalas smoldered in the aftermath of their onslaught. Though the Sunwell had saved the elves from annihilation, their kingdom bore deep scars, both in its land and its people. Yet for the High Elves, survival meant a chance to rebuild, while the Horde, frustrated but undeterred, set its sights on a far greater prize. The Amani trolls, uninterested in Gul'dan's grand promises of power, remained steadfast in their siege of Silvermoon. Even as the Stormreaver and Twilight's Hammer clans began their southward journey under the Warlock's commands, the trolls refused to relent. They fought on with unyielding ferocity, determined to see their ancient enemies annihilated. However, they now fought alone, their allies gone, and their efforts were doomed to fail. The Dragonmaw clan, though tasked with overseeing Gul'dan's activities, saw the unfolding betrayal as too great of a risk to confront directly. Rather than engage Gul'dan and his forces, they chose to depart quietly, intent on warning the rest of the Horde of the Warlock's treachery. Meanwhile, the Amani struggle against the High Elves dragged on, each battle more desperate than the last. Though the trolls inflicted heavy casualties, their relentless assault ultimately crumbled. The elven defenders, led by their skilled rangers, pushed the Amani back. Zul'Aman itself was besieged, and warlord Zul'Jin, the heart of their resistance, was captured by a group of rangers under the command of Haldoran Brightwing. Though Zul'Jin narrowly escaped captivity and vanished into hiding, the defeat marked the collapse of the Amani offense. While the Amani fell to ruin, Gul'dan's Stormreavers and the Twilight's Hammer moved swiftly. Their treacherous march south met little resistance as they reached the Hillsbrad foothills. Now largely deserted by Horde forces focused on the march toward Capital City, there Gul'dan seized a portion of the Horde fleet, commandeering ships to carry his loyalists westward into the Great Sea. His ambitions lay far from the Horde's war or its goals. His eyes were set on the tomb of Sargeras. Elsewhere, in the early days of the Horde's invasion of Quel'Thalas, a splinter group of orcs broke away from the main force, turning their attention to human settlements. They descended upon the community of Blackwood, reducing it to ashes. Every person perished despite the valorous efforts of Baron Garithos, who led a last stand against the invaders. Among the dead were Garithos' family, a loss that would shape his son, Othmar. Surviving the tragedy, Othmar Garithos fought alongside the knights defending the High Elven lands, but the scars of Blackwood's destruction left him bitter. He placed the blame for his family's death squarely on the Thalassian elves, fueling a resentment that would fester in his heart for years to come. Doomhammer's horde pressed westward, their determination burning as fiercely as the flames left in their wake. The prize they sought, the human capital, lay tantalizingly close, but the towering Alterac mountains loomed as a potential obstacle. These alpine passes, if adequately defended, could delay their advance for months and jeopardize the horde's momentum. Yet fortune favored the invaders in a way few could have foreseen. As the horde reached the edges of the mountain range, they were greeted not by human defenders, but by an unexpected envoy, King Aiden Perinold of Alterac himself. From the war's onset, Perinold had been reluctant to engage the horde, viewing their power as unstoppable even by the united might of the Alliance. The sight of Doomhammer's army at his doorstep, an intimidating host of Death Knights, Ogre Magi, and Dragons, solidified his resolve to avoid conflict at all costs. Fearing the destruction of his kingdom, Perinold sought to broker a deal with Doomhammer, even if it meant betraying his allies and committing high treason. The king proposed a bargain, safe passage for the horde through the treacherous mountain passes in exchange for Alterac's preservation. Doomhammer accepted without hesitation. With Perinold's guidance, the horde bypassed all defensive positions in the mountains, advancing swiftly toward their ultimate goal, the Tirisfal Glades and Capital City. Emerging from the mountains unscathed, Doomhammer wasted no time. The war chief ordered his forces to lay siege to the human capital without delay, fully aware that time was slipping away. The Alliance, scattered and struggling to regroup, still posed a threat if given the chance to rally. For Doomhammer, victory demanded swift and decisive action. As the horde began its assault, the fate of Lordaeron and the Alliance hung in the balance. Perinold's betrayal had opened the gates for the horde's advance, but repercussions of his treachery would ripple far beyond the peaks of Alterac, shaping the future of Azeroth in ways neither king nor warchief could have anticipated. While Doomhammer's horde advanced on Lordaeron's capital with alarming speed, Turallion and the Alliance army in Quel'Thalas scrambled to respond. Though the Alliance had anticipated that the horde might eventually strike at the heart of Lordaeron, the speed of their movements came as a dire shock. King Perinold's betrayal, enacted none had foreseen, had unraveled the Alliance's defenses and allowed the horde to bypass critical choke points. Turallion, commanding the remnants of the Alliance forces, set his sights on the capital. Rallying his troops, he ordered a swift march south, knowing that time was their greatest enemy. Yet even as he pushed his forces to their limits, doubt gnawed at him. Would they arrive in time to bolster the city's defenses, or would they find it in ruins upon their arrival? Within the walls of Capital City, King Tyrannus took command of the city's defense with resolve. Though he lacked personal experience on the battlefield, Tyrannus was a man of vision, charisma, and unshakable determination. He rallied the city's defenders and citizens alike with impassioned speeches, reminding them that the survival of humanity itself hung in the balance. Against the counsel of his advisors, Tyrannus took his place on the battlements, overseeing the defense with his own eyes. His presence inspired courage in his people, bolstering their will to fight. Even Doomhammer, a seasoned warrior and tactician, harbored a grudging respect for Tyrannus' tenacity and the unity of his people. Yet respect did not alter his purpose. The Horde siege engines pounded relentlessly at the city walls, each strike weakening the once imposing fortifications. As the flames of war consumed the outskirts, Doomhammer remained certain of one thing: Capital City would fall. It was only a matter of time, especially once the remainder of the Horde forces arrived from Quel'Thalas. As the siege raged on, the hopes of the defenders rested on the horizon. Reinforcements were coming, led by Turalyon and his hastily assembled army. But whether they would arrive before the city's walls crumbled under the Horde's relentless assault remained an open question. The stage was set for a battle that would determine not just the fate of the capital, but the future of all humanity. The absence of the Stormreaver, Twilight's Hammer, and Dragonmaw clans began to weigh heavily on the Horde's siege of Capital City. Left behind to ensure the final destruction of Silvermoon, these clans had yet to rejoin the main force, their delay becoming a source of quiet unease among Doomhammer's commanders. Left behind to ensure the final destruction of Silvermoon, these clans had yet to rejoin the main force, their delay becoming a source of quiet unease among Doomhammer's commanders. The siege, which had started with relentless force, now faced a new challenge: the arrival of Turalyon and his alliance army from the east. Turalyon's sudden appearance forced Doomhammer to divert resources from the siege to confront this new threat. The Horde's pressure on the city slackened slightly as warriors were pulled from the front lines to hold back the advancing alliance. Yet Doomhammer's concern wasn't for Turalyon's army itself. He had no doubts about the Horde's ability to face them in battle. What unsettled him was the deeper implication of their arrival. If Turalyon had reached the capital first, it meant other alliance armies were likely close behind. The clock was now ticking. For the Horde to seize victory, the city's walls needed to fall, and quickly. Doomhammer knew the Alliance forces converging on the capital would only grow stronger as they arrived, turning what had been an advantage for the Horde into a precarious position. The Warchief still had his Death Knights, the Ogre Magi, and other powerful weapons at his disposal, but they were not enough on their own to overwhelm the city's formidable defenses. Doomhammer's frustration mounted. The three missing clans represented the reinforcements he needed to deliver the final blow. Without their numbers, storming the battlements would be a costly and prolonged endeavor, one that risked handing the Alliance time to regroup and outmaneuver them. The Warchief's determination burned brighter than ever. With each passing moment, the balance of power in the siege teetered closer to a turning point. The siege of Capital City had become more than a battle of strength. It was a race against time, and the stakes had never been higher. The Horde's unity and resolve would soon be tested as the war reached its fevered crescendo. The arrival of the Dragonmaw clan brought a moment of grim clarity to Warchief Doomhammer. Marching into the Horde's besieged camp alone, their battered warriors bore devastating news. Gul'dan, in a final act of treachery, had taken the Stormreaver and Twilight's Hammer clans and abandoned the Horde entirely. As the weight of this betrayal settled over Doomhammer, another blow followed swiftly. Reports confirmed that the Alliance had uncovered King Perenald's treachery. Troops from Stromgarde, led by the indomitable King Thoris Trollbane, had seized Alterac and fortified its mountain passes, effectively cutting off the Horde's last connection to reinforcements from the Hillsbrad foothills and Hinterlands. Doomhammer now faced an unbearable truth. The Horde army, entrenched in Tira's fall and battered from prolonged fighting, was utterly isolated. Even if the walls of Capital City fell, the Horde's position had become indefensible. The Alliance's combined forces, bolstered by reinforcements converging from across the region, would be unstoppable. The campaign was lost. Rage burned within the Warchief at this momentous setback. The betrayal of Gul'dan, the betrayal of Perenald, and the encroaching Alliance had conspired to unravel the Horde's ambitions. With no other option, Doomhammer gave the bitter command. The Horde would retreat to Khaz Modan. It was a desperate bid to regroup what remained of his forces and salvage some fragment of victory from the ashes of defeat. To ensure the retreat was not a slaughter, Doomhammer deployed his remaining assets with precision. The Red Dragon Riders were unleashed to harass and delay the pursuing Alliance forces, their fiery breath intended to buy the Horde precious time. Meanwhile, Doomhammer tasked the Blacktooth Grin clan with a singular mission: to hunt down and eliminate Gul'dan. The Warlock's treachery had not only cost the Horde critical manpower, but may have doomed the entire campaign. His betrayal would not go unanswered. As the Horde began its retreat, its once mighty army fractured and bloodied, the ambitions of conquest that had driven Doomhammer and his warriors for so long seemed a distant dream. Yet even in defeat, the war chief clung to his resolve, determined to rebuild and fight another day. The Horde found itself in full retreat, scrambling to reach friendly territory as the relentless Alliance forces bore down on them with unyielding determination. In the Hinterlands, the Orcs barely managed to break through Anduin Lothar's formidable troops, making a desperate bid for Thandal's span to the south. Hot on their heels was the main Horde force, led by War Chief Orgrim Doomhammer. Exhausted after weeks of grueling marches and skirmishes, Doomhammer's warriors stumbled into the wetlands, battered and weary. But time was their enemy, and there was no respite. With grim resolve, they pressed on into the frigid peaks of Khaz Modan, knowing that every moment counted. The Alliance, bolstered by their own recent victories, swiftly reclaimed Thandal's span with the support of naval forces from the recently liberated island of Tolbarad. Their momentum carried them further, liberating Dun Moder and Dun Algaz as they pushed southward. Yet despite their success, one critical location eluded their grasp: the shadowed halls of Grim Batol, its dark secrets being concealed from the advancing armies, who remained unaware of the Horde's stronghold within. Far across the seas, on the storm-lashed island housing the tomb of Sargeras, Gul'dan's treacherous ambition came to a brutal end. The Warlock met his fate at the hands of the tomb's demonic guardians, his thirst for power leading to his destruction. The Stormreaver and Twilight Hammer clans, loyal to Gul'dan, shared his grim demise. They were mercilessly hunted down by the Blacktooth Grin clan, led by Maim and Dalrend Blackhand. Acting on Doomhammer's orders, the brothers ensured that few of Gul'dan's followers escaped the island alive, stamping out the last embers of his betrayal in a sea of blood. It was a time of chaos and desperation, where victories were hard won and the cost of failure was paid in lives. Both the Horde and the Alliance fought with everything they had, their destinies entwined in the fires of an unforgiving war. Dragon Riders dispatched by War Chief Doomhammer eventually located the Blacktooth Grin clan on their return journey, bearing news of Gul'dan's demise. Doomhammer welcomed the report with grim satisfaction, lamenting only that it was not his axe that struck the final blow. Yet even with Gul'dan gone, the forces returning by sea would arrive too late to bolster the Horde's precarious position. The once mighty Horde that had entered Khaz Modan was now a shadow of its former strength. Less than half of its original force remained. Doomhammer recognized the grim reality. Khaz Modan could not be defended in their weakened state, especially with the looming threat of the dwarves and gnomes rejoining the fray. The War Chief knew he needed reinforcements, and he needed them quickly. Messengers were dispatched across the dark portal to Draenor, calling for reinforcements from the savage and bloodthirsty clans that had stayed behind. Every available soldier would be required. Doomhammer declared Blackrock Spire as the Horde's rallying point, a fortress deep in Horde territory where they could trade space for time. There, the Alliance would pay a bloody toll for every inch they advanced. The Bleeding Hollow clan, entrenched in Khaz Modan since the early days of the Second War, was tasked with a grim mission. They were to hold back the advancing Alliance forces at all cost, delaying their progress to buy Doomhammer the precious time he needed to regroup and fortify. It was a desperate gambit, but the Horde's survival depended on it. At the same time, Doomhammer reached out to Chieftain Zuluhead of the Dragonmaw clan with urgent orders. Zuluhead was to gather every scattered Dragon Rider under his command and prepare for the final battle. He was also instructed to transport Alexstrasza the Lifebinder and any other red dragon still held at Grim Batol to Blackrock Mountain immediately. Their fiery strength would be vital in the coming confrontation. Additionally, Zuluhead was charged with guarding the Blacktooth Grin as they sailed back to safety. Doomhammer's strategy was bold, yet tinged with desperation. The Horde was battered and outnumbered, but their war chief's resolve remained unshaken. The final act of the Second War was beginning to take shape, with Blackrock Mountain as its inevitable stage. Every decision Doomhammer made was laced with the hope that the Horde could hold the line, reclaim their strength, and perhaps, just perhaps, turn the tide once more. Supreme Commander Anduin Lothar drove his forces relentlessly, urging them to match the pace of the retreating Horde. Victory, after months of grueling marches and brutal battles, was finally within their grasp. Much of the Alliance army's endurance during this pursuit could be attributed to the unwavering efforts of the Paladins who marched alongside them. The Knights of the Silver Hand worked tirelessly, healing the wounded, inspiring the weary, and fortifying the resolve of all who doubted. Their steadfast presence kept morale high, turning what could have been a demoralized chase into a triumphant push. The Alliance's advance into Khaz Modan was swift and decisive, culminating in the defeat of the Bleeding Hollow clan. With the Horde routed, the long-besieged dwarves of Ironforge and gnomes of Gnomeregan emerged from their strongholds, free for the first time in years. Their celebrations were short-lived but jubilant, as they pledged their full support to the Alliance's cause. Their unified goal was clear: the utter destruction of the Horde. Hunting parties, often led by Paladins, swept across the region to root out any remaining pockets of resistance before the main army prepared to move southward. Meanwhile, at sea to the northwest of Khaz Modan, the Blacktooth Grin clan sought to make their way back to Horde-controlled territory. When news of the Horde's retreat to Blackrock Mountain reached Dalrend and Main Blackhand, they redirected their course towards Stormwind City, which was still under Horde control. Their journey was abruptly interrupted near the island of Crestfall, where the Alliance Navy, led by Admiral Dalen Proudmoore, finally caught up to the Orc fleet. The ensuing battle at Crestfall was a clash of fire, steel, and sky. Proudmoore's fleet unleashed a devastating volley of cannon fire upon the lumbering Horde vessels, tearing them apart and sending them to their watery graves. Above the chaos, dwarven Griffin Riders soared into battle. Hardened by previous encounters with Horde Dragon Riders, these skilled aviators deftly outmaneuvered the Red Dragons, providing critical support to the fleet below. Despite their efforts, the dragons managed to inflict devastating losses, their fiery breath claiming the entirety of the Alliance's third fleet. Among those lost was Derek Proudmoore, the Admiral's son, whose death in the flames would forever haunt his father. The Alliance emerged victorious, securing naval supremacy and ensuring no further Horde reinforcements could escape. While Dalrend and Main Blackhand, along with a handful of survivors, managed to evade destruction, the vast majority of the Horde fleet now lay shattered at the bottom of the Great Sea. The Alliance's victory at Crestfall was a turning point in the war, a decisive blow that crippled the Horde's naval power and solidified the Alliance's path toward ultimate triumph. Yet even in victory, the cost was heavy, a reminder that the war's end, though near, would not come without sacrifice. The Alliance army, an unyielding force of thousands, marched into the smoldering waste of the burning steppes. Their sights set on the Horde's most formidable stronghold, Blackrock Mountain. Humans, dwarves, elves, and gnomes advanced side by side, their resolve as unyielding as the volcanic peaks looming ahead. The siege engines rumbled forward, their massive wheels carving deep tracks into the scorched earth, as the Alliance prepared to lay siege to the Horde's final bastion. Inside Blackrock Mountain, War Chief Doomhammer stood on the brink of desperation. The reinforcements he so desperately needed were nowhere to be found. The Dragonmaw clan and their fearsome dragons had yet to arrive from Grim Batal. The Blacktooth Grin clan was crippled, their fleet nearly obliterated at the Battle of Crestfall, and no aid from Draenor would arrive in time to turn the tide. But Doomhammer was not a leader who surrendered to despair. If defeat was inevitable, he would make it a defeat for the ages, a final glorious stand against the encroaching Alliance. Calling on the Horde to remember its roots, Doomhammer stoked the fires of their bloodlust. He painted the coming battle not as a defense, but as an act of vengeance, a reckoning for the indignities suffered at the hands of their enemies. The gates of Blackrock Mountain stood firm against the Alliance's siege engines. But Doomhammer had no intention of waiting for them to break. Instead, the great doors suddenly groaned open, and from the heart of the mountain poured thousands of Horde warriors, their roars echoing like thunder across the battlefield. At the forefront of this ferocious charge was Doomhammer himself, clad in his iconic black plate armor and wielding the mighty hammer that bore his name. Though he knew the Horde lacked the strength to overwhelm the Alliance through sheer force, Doomhammer had a different target in mind: Supreme Commander Anduin Lothar. He believed that if he could bring down the Alliance's leader on the field of battle, the human forces would crumble, just as the Orcs would falter at the death of their war chief. The sudden onslaught caught the Alliance forces off guard. For a moment, chaos rippled through their ranks as the Horde pressed forward with suicidal ferocity. Amid the carnage, Doomhammer's warriors carved a path of destruction, a wedge aimed directly at Lothar. The war chief's strategy was bold, reckless, and brimming with the defiance of a leader determined to face his enemies on his own terms. And so, through fire, steel, and blood, Doomhammer fought his way toward the man he believed held the key to the battle's outcome. The clash of these two titanic figures was inevitable, a collision of ideals, strength, and destiny set against the backdrop of a war that would shape the future of Azeroth. The battlefield trembled as Lothar faced Doomhammer in single combat, Amid the chaos of clashing armies and the screams of war, the two titans stood locked in a duel that seemed to hold the fate of Azeroth itself. Soldiers from both sides paused, their gazes fixed on the scene, as the sharp clash of steel against iron rang out like a war drum across the smoldering landscape. Lothar, a towering figure even by Orcish standards, wielded his greatsword with practiced precision. His years of experience and sheer skill gave him a formidable edge. But Doomhammer, younger, larger, and brimming with raw strength, matched the human commander blow for blow. Every swing of his hammer carried unrelenting ferocity, each strike pushing Lothar further back. The tide of their battle shifted steadily, as Doomhammer's strength and stamina began to overpower the veteran's seasoned tactics. With a thunderous sweep of his weapon, Doomhammer shattered Lothar's greatsword into splintered shards, the force of the blow driving the Supreme Commander to his knees. For a brief, harrowing moment, silence fell over the battlefield. Then, in a final brutal swing, the Warchief crushed Lothar's skull, ending the legendary commander's life in an instant. The ripple effect was immediate. Horde warriors roared in triumph, their spirits ignited by the sight of their leader's victory. They surged forward with renewed vigor, pressing their advantage. Meanwhile, the Alliance forces faltered. A wave of despair washed over them as the realization struck. Lothar was gone. Fear and sorrow spread like wildfire through their ranks, threatening to undo them entirely. But amid the chaos, a light emerged. Turalyon, a paladin and one of Lothar's most trusted lieutenants, refused to accept defeat. Fueled by grief and unwavering faith, he unleashed the full force of his holy power. His body radiated with divine light, blinding everyone around him, halting the frenzied battle in its tracks. In the ethereal glow, Turalyon stepped forward, his resolve burning like a beacon. He retrieved Lothar's broken weapon from the blood-soaked ground and turned to face Doomhammer. With one swift, unrelenting strike, Turalyon brought the shattered blade down on the stunned Warchief, knocking him unconscious. In that moment, the tide turned once again. Turalyon's act of defiance rekindled the Alliance's hope, rallying their soldiers to stand and fight. The death of Lothar, though a devastating blow, became a rallying cry, uniting the Alliance forces to push forward. The battle was far from over, but the spark of resistance had been reignited, and Turalyon, now bearing the mantle of leadership, vowed that his commander's sacrifice would not be in vain. Turalyon stepped forward, the weight of loss and duty etched into his every movement. As a new commander of the Alliance, he raised his voice above the din of despair, calling on his comrades to stand tall in the face of darkness. He invoked the memory of Anduin Lothar, the man who had led them with unwavering courage, even when all seemed lost. Lothar never gave in to despair, Turalyon declared, his voice resolute. He fought for a future free from the shadow of the Horde, and as his sons and daughters, it is our duty to see his legacy fulfilled. The word struck a deep chord within the hearts of those who listened. Grief and fear gave way to a rising tide of hope and purpose. Turalyon's unwavering belief in their cause ignited a renewed sense of justice among the Alliance forces. They had come too far, sacrificed too much to falter now. Wasting no time, Turalyon reformed the Alliance ranks, his command sharp and clear. With a final thunderous battle cry, the Alliance surged forward, their charge crashing into the battered Horde like an unstoppable tide. The Orcish forces, already shaken by the loss of their Warchief, buckled under the sheer force of the assault. What remained of their cohesion crumbled, and the Horde army scattered in every direction, some fleeing south toward the distant Dark Portal in a desperate bid for survival. Near Blackrock Mountain, a handful of orcs refused to retreat, choosing instead to fight on in defiance. But Turalyon, driven not by vengeance but by justice, ordered his forces to overwhelm and capture these remaining fighters rather than cut them down. The battlefield became a testament to the Alliance's resolve, as even the fallen Warchief Doomhammer was seized and bound in chains alongside the other prisoners. When the dust settled, the once mighty Horde lay shattered beyond any hope of recovery. The chains around their prisoners symbolized more than just their defeat. They marked the end of a war that had ravaged Azeroth. Standing amidst the echoes of the final battle, Turalyon carried the memory of Anduin Lothar, now more than a fallen hero. He was a symbol of the unity and resilience that had brought the Alliance to victory. And so, the dawn of a new chapter began, shaped by the sacrifices of those who refused to yield. The defeat at Blackrock Mountain had shattered Doomhammer's horde beyond repair. The once mighty force, now scattered and broken, fled southward under the command of the cunning Death Knight, Terran Khan Gorfiend. His destination was the Dark Portal, the mysterious gateway to Draenor and the Horde's only hope for refuge. But the remnants of the Horde found no respite in their flight, as Turalyon and his relentless Alliance forces pursued them at every turn. The Alliance, driven by a desire not only for vengeance but also for answers, pursued Gorfien's group with single-minded determination. They sought the Dark Portal, the source of the Orcs' invasion and the root of the cause that had consumed their world. The pursuit came to a head in the Black Morass, just outside the portal itself. Here, amidst the barren and twisted landscape, Turalyon's forces descended upon their enemy. The battle that followed was among the most desperate and brutal of the war. The Horde, now fighting not for conquest but for survival, unleashed their full fury. Death Knights clad in dark armor wove destructive magics, while the beleaguered Orcs fought with a savage determination born of desperation. The Alliance pressed hard, but the Horde's resistance was fierce. In the chaos, Gorfien's forces managed to buy enough time to retreat through the Dark Portal, slipping away into the unknown reaches of Draenor. Despite the Alliance's determination, Turalyon made a fateful decision. He would not order his forces to follow. The risk of venturing into an alien world, unprepared and vulnerable, was too great. Instead, he resolved to destroy the portal and seal the gateway forever. To accomplish this monumental task, Turalyon called upon the arcane mastery of Khadgar and his fellow mages from the Kirin Tor. The spellcasters gathered around the towering stone frame of the Dark Portal, channeling their combined power into a spell of unimaginable magnitude. The air shimmered with raw magic, as the incantation unraveled the very fabric of the portal, ripping apart the energies that sustain the rift between worlds. The spell culminated in a blinding explosion of arcane force, shattering the stone gateway into a rain of dust and debris. The sky itself seemed to ripple with the aftershock, the echoes of the portal's destruction fading into silence. The gathered Alliance forces erupted into jubilant cheers, their voices ringing out across the Black Morass. The Dark Portal, the symbol of the Horde's invasion and the source of so much suffering, was no more. For the Alliance, the destruction of the portal marked the end of the Second War, a victory hard won but costly. The battlefield was littered with the scars of their struggle, and the memories of the fallen weighed heavily on those who survived. As the dust settled and the cheering faded, many among the Alliance forces stood in quiet reflection. The portal's destruction closed a dark chapter in Azeroth's history, but its legacy would linger, a reminder of the sacrifices made to defend their world. That's going to do it for this one. Hopefully you did enjoy. Thanks for tuning in. See you in the next one. Take care of yourself.